Morning, everyone. We're going to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, February 21st. This is our regularly scheduled town council meeting. All members of council are present, including the town attorney, town manager, and town clerk. If you'll please rise for invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
As we gather here today, we pray that we are ever mindful of opportunities to render our service to fellow citizens and to our community. We ask you to guide those who, as our government leaders, make their daily decisions that affect us, so that their efforts shall be motivated by the same great rule of charity and goodwill. Let us continue to strive to make a better world. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. As a reminder, if you'd please make sure your phones are silent, just in case they go off. I know I have a habit of forgetting to do that, so just a friendly reminder. Is there a motion to approve the final agenda?
I would request that we pull item B from the consent agenda, which is the Scott's turf thing, the Scott Field refurbishment program.
Okay, I don't have any problem with that. Fellow members, any issues with doing that? We'll pull that out and put it above the public hearings. If that works. Hearing that change, is there a motion to approve the final agenda with that amended pulling of consent agenda B?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion is carried unanimously. Next, we have public comment. Madam Clerk?
Before we begin, I did receive an email from Tim Shadle with a lengthy comment that I have forwarded on to all council members for their review. And I also was presented a handout from DeWitt and Christine Willis this morning that I have forwarded to council members also. And first public comment is Cindy Johnson.
Morning, Cindy.
I attended the Marine Turtle Permit Holders meeting in Tampa this weekend, and I'm sure you knew this was going to come up. They completed their window tint study, and the results were that any window tint above 30% is going to disorient the turtles. So that leaves us in a spot because we have 45, and I guess I'm here to inform you and the general public that if you want to live a Chad-free life after you sign your easement, then please put in the 30% window tint and also your year-round amber LED lighting within the CCCL, downward directed and fully shielded. So, and it's another, since there's red tide out there, I wanted to just remind people, because we had an incident this morning, not with a turtle, but if you find any sea turtles on the beach right now, they should not be coming up this soon. So it's because they may be sick or being affected by the red tide, and we need to address that and get them up to Moat Marine or to Clearwater Aquarium, since we don't have crow right now. So please call Turtle Time at 239-481-5566, or you can call the FWC with any marine mammal, including dolphin and manatee, 1-888-404-3922. Please call them. Don't push anyone back into the water. Let's address what's going on and why they're up there. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Cindy.
Samantha Campbell.
We just wanted, good morning, everyone. We just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention that this weekend, prior to 6 a.m., the beach theater folks pulled out all of the mangroves behind the beach theater. They have been completely destroyed and are gone. That now puts the community at a risk of additional debris in future storms, as well as additional flooding and erosion. We can't even trim ours, which we just want them trimmed up after the storm, and we can't even find anybody that'll even touch them because of them being mangroves. But yet, another business is allowed to completely take them out. not even any concern for the community, just remove them. On top of doing it prior to 6 a.m., I mean, we thought something exploded because they were dropping roll-off dumpsters at 5:30 in the morning. In addition to that, Charlie's Boathouse has not cleaned up any of their debris out of the building, and it's continuing to go into the canal every time there's wind, storms, on top of the fact that they never cleaned out their coolers, so there's stench. Anytime the wind blows, something needs to be addressed on those items. I mean, we've cleaned up, I don't know how much of their stuff. We continue to get it on our property and in our mangroves that we can't get to because their lack of cleanup. Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha. John, could you add that, could you update everyone as to the procedure of the town? I know you and I have spoken about it, but the procedure in which the town can enforce or start to enforce issues like Samantha just raised? Thanks. Madam Clerk,
That is all I have signed up.
is there anyone else that chooses to speak in public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Next, we'll move on to local achievement and recognitions. Vice Mayor Adderholt.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be brief on this. This morning, I would like to recognize the parents and the kids that attend the beach school. We hear terms, and rightfully so, describing the island as strong and resilient, but I think when I think about these parents having to navigate all the challenges post-Ian with small children at a time when the Lee County School District is trying to litigate the future of the school, I use the term grit. These folks are, many of whom not living in their homes, and again, navigating this litigation, as well as having small kids who are adversely impacted by the school closing as well. So again, recognize those parents and kids, but I recognize them for a purpose, because tomorrow, Wednesday, the Lee County School Board is having a meeting. It's really called a briefing, school board briefing at 1 o'clock. It's at the Lee County Public Education Boardroom, 2855 Colonial Boulevard, Fort Myers, 33966, for those who want to use your GPS. You need to fill out a card prior to the meeting if you'd like to speak. Certainly would love to have a great showing there. This briefing, the board will consider 3 options, and I think they will be giving direction to the superintendent and to staff as to which option they would like to see further delineated and clarified, and I think they'll give some direction as to which option they'd like the school district to go. So important for us to have a strong presence. If you can't make it, I would encourage everyone to go on the Lee County School District's website. You'll see a little box that says School Board, and then you'll see a map of Lee County and the school board districts. There's 5 individual districts for the school board members, and there's 2 at-large members that serve the entirety of Lee County. So I would encourage you to send and then if you look at the biographies of each school board member, once you find out who your 3 school board members are, if you look at their biographies and you just click their name, it'll instantly set up an email where you could voice your support for the beach school. We're trying to keep this positive, but at the same time, we're trying to keep the pressure on. And if you live in one of these members' districts, and again, obviously everyone in Lee County lives in the 2 school board members, so important that they hear from you in a very positive way about how much the beach school means to you and to the island of Fort Myers Beach. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Jim? Councilor Veach?
Yeah, I certainly agree with his assessment of the parents. They're a formidable group. I would just like to thank the town staff, Public Works, for out there this morning cleaning up dead fish from the red tide over the weekend. Not a job I'd like, and just so people know, if you're out on the beach and you don't see fish, doesn't mean there's not red tide, because those guys are out there continually flicking them into their truck.
Councilor Woodson?
Yeah, I have 2 things. So I wanted to go back to the Beach Elementary, if I could, Vice Mayor. I watched the key staffer when you had Patrick Vanass, and you were talking about the 3 options that were being weighed in on, and there was one that, in particular, that the parents and everyone agreed would be the best option, I think option C. So I think that's the one that people really need to look at and study. I know it's been all over Facebook and announced and that type of thing, but it's kind of a give and take on both sides, and financially probably the best option. So just to move forward with that. I would like to thank Beach Talk Radio once again. I contacted them. I sit on the board of Lovers Key State Park, and we had a board meeting last week and found out that all of the supplies for our summer eco camps for the kids were gone. I mean, it was life jackets and snorkeling gear and all this kind of thing. And our education director figured it was, she itemized everything. It was like $3,700. So BTR put it out there, and within 7 hours, we had $4,000 that they had raised for Lovers Key State Park and the ecosystem, or the eco education system. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to all the people that contributed to that. It's really important. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor King?
I'll just say, as we're approaching, well, we're sitting 1 week away from 5 months since Hurricane Ian, and I just want to thank the residents of this island and the town staff for their perseverance, their hard work, and their dedication. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I briefly just want to thank John Henry, the owner of the Red Sox. He invited myself, as well as the town manager, and a couple of families to the stadium yesterday to meet some of the players and take batting practice out on the field, and they got to run around. And Chris Sale, pitcher for the Red Sox, was very, very personable and spent a lot of time with the kids running around. So special thanks to them for giving a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to kids that really needed an uplift. Also want to thank the staff for the Edison Parade. They invited us to be involved in that over the weekend. That was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we were following, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but fortunately we were following Mary Holly Smith, and her car broke down. Poor thing. And she got to see a view of the parade that she probably didn't expect. So condolences to her. She was there. She said she didn't get home till 11:30. So, but just thank you to the staff. They put on another great parade, and I can tell you there was a lot of support, a lot of people screaming that they love Fort Myers Beach and are excited about the rebuild. So thank you for that. Moving on to advisory committee items, reports, and appointments. Steve Johnson from MRF is here.
Morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council members. Just a quick update here on MRF. First, I'd like to thank you all for expediting the appointments and reappointments to all the advisory board. Everybody's anxious to get to lend a hand in everything that's going on. I did want to let you know also that there has been Friends of MRF, for lack of a better term, would like to donate items in order to get the pop-up booth coming up and running again. There's been some requests, and I just wanted to let you know that was also on the docket. We appreciate also the four, again, reappointments to MRF, so we're fully loaded and ready to go, and would just request that we begin our meeting schedule again in the month of March to provide the oversight for the things that fall under our scope, and also act as the research arm for the council for any ongoing issues that you have for us. So thank you very much.
Steve, I have a question for you.
Yeah, run off too fast.
You always have questions, Jim.
If you could take off your MRF hat for a second and put on your mosquito board hat.
Okay.
I think the public would be interested. Just a brief overview as to what happened to the mosquito facilities, mosquito board facilities on the island, and just a brief update as to what the status is of your world as a mosquito board member.
Okay. Well, we are in a bad way. The entire property, the building. The trucks, the sprayers were raised right from the ground, pushed into the canal. Some of it ended up, I think, in my backyard. But so right now there is a temporary trailer there, as well as a small shed for the trucks. We've actually gotten the trucks back, and also a sprayer if needed. The mosquito district does probably 95% larviciding here on the beach, so we don't have to spray, which is preemptive and prevents the hatching from occurring. I think this wet season is going to be horrendous, and it's going to take a lot of work to keep these things at bay, just because there's so much debris and water holding containers that are out there. Right now, we are looking to rebuild, but I will say that the state has instituted a performance audit for all special districts statewide, and so we're going to attempt to conduct that performance audit with really nothing in regards to infrastructure, as well as a lot of our policies were handwritten versus electronic. So we're in the process of recouping all of our electronic data and attempting to continue to provide mosquito abatement services to the island.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, you're welcome.
Before you run on,
Yeah, I was going to say, hold on,
Okay.
Steve.
Okay, okay.
just so is there consensus among council so they can start meeting in March? Is that okay with council?
I think as long as staff and we can secure the room, if staff can make it work and Diamond Head's willing to let us use the space, I don't see a problem with it.
Good. Thank you very much. That was our understanding.
And also the thing that I don't know if you met her, this woman Cindy over here was talking about, that if Murph could put it on the agenda and look into that. I saw the report about the lighting, and it's basically said that tinting greater than 30%, there was kind of diminishing returns in the
That's
chart I
correct.
saw. So I'd appreciate if Murph would look into that and make a recommendation based on it.
Okay, sounds good.
Any other questions for Steve before he runs off?
I'm out of hats. I gotta go.
Thanks, Steve. We also have Chair of the LPA, Anita Saracita. Miss Anita?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Anita Saracita, the chairperson of your local planning agency. I'm here this morning to officially request that we have a joint work session with you in March with the consultant for the LDC and the comp plan. We discussed at our meeting of February 14th that it might be very beneficial for both of us, since we're talking in parallel lines, that we sort of converse together so that we don't get off track on what the council hopes to achieve through that planning effort. So the board all agreed that they could make themselves available at that date, and hope that you will support that so that we can speak together and in one voice as far as planning and especially where the comp plan is concerned and the changes that are being proposed. I'm also here.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just for clarification, just so the clerk can hear, everyone and the public can hear, you're referring to the M&P meeting on March 9th at 9 o'clock, correct?
That's correct.
Very good.
Which we understood that the consultant, Mr. No, will be here to discuss with you all his suggestions and recommendations to begin that dialogue. We made a short list of things that we were going to discuss. One of the things that you all had talked about at your last meeting was trying to define what is public benefit. And just a short list of items that we feel are important to bring before you. And so we thought that the joint meeting would be probably the most fruitful effort in that endeavor.
I would just, on my behalf, I would just say that I think that the timing of that would be perfect. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Can we
Absolutely.
Can we do that after the M&P? So,
It would be
or would you want the M&P to be a joint meeting?
Yes, in the past, the LPA, in the past, the council has had joint meetings with all of their advisory committees, so that it's an effort to stay on the same page. So you don't, you've seen the LPA. We could go rogue in a minute. Which you don't want that to happen. So we wanted to just make sure that we're all on the same page. I'm also here, as you guys who have served on the LPA in the past will know, to appear in the course of the zoning cases if you prefer, or I could just highlight the LPA's perspective on the zoning cases that are before you that we have heard. Mr. Mayor, what's your pleasure? You want me to come up during the course of the case?
That would be my preference. I think
Okay.
it's more beneficial, at least to me. I'll
Okay.
defer. Do you guys have an issue with?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Otherwise, it can get lost in the discussion of other things.
No
so,
problem at all. That's all I have for the report.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
Thanks. Seeing no one else here from the advisory committees, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from Town Council meeting February 6th, M&P meeting February 9th, and the Town Council special meeting on February 9th? I'll move it.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries unanimously. Next, we have the consent agenda. Item B has been pulled, so that leaves item A, International Fine Arts Studio, Inc. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries unanimously. Now we'll discuss consent agenda item B, Scotts Field refurbishment program application. Counselor Veach?
Hi, Allison. I had two questions about this that I just wanted to bring up. And one was, does participating, and I understand this is like a grant program?
It is a grant,
Right.
yes.
Does being into this program, does that in any way limit what we can do with the fields? Because right now, Bay Oaks with the school and with everything else, there's a lot of things up in the air.
So the ball fields, it was my understanding, Allison Geeson, for the record, Director of Culture, Parks, and Recreation, it was my understanding that the ball fields would remain, and this grant allows us to offset up to $50,000. It's a non-matching grant, which means the town does not have to match any. If we do apply for it, and it is the wishes of the council for me to move forward, the deadline is February 28th. We would know spring and summer of this year, and they would start to contribute to that. So it's a very short amount of time that we have to be able to apply, and then the return for the money to be used would be completed before this summer.
Now, so the question is, because we have the small ball field, right, and the large one's kind of going to be planning on being moved with if we redo Bay Oaks. So would this be applying just to the small ball field?
It could, yes. It goes for sod and any of the infields, any of the things that, and it's quite expensive the sod itself, that could be used for the 50,000. So it could be used for the small ball field, because I know what you're saying with the redevelopment, it was to be able to be shifted. So it could be used for that as well.
Now, our agreement, I think isn't it the FEMA is going to rehabilitate the area where they've been putting the debris? Is that just down to topsoil?
They will test environmentally, test the soil and remediate to the depth necessary. So if there's been some contaminants that have leached down a couple of feet, they'll actually excavate and remove that contaminated soil.
And will they resod it, or is that up to us?
No, that's us. That's our, that's then transitions over to FEMA to resod and rebuild the asset that the town had. So they'll leave us clean earth, but after that, we'll switch over to a FEMA funding source to
Okay.
rebuild the park.
So it could be a redundant funding source.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question is, this includes like chemical treatments? Are we going to be putting anything on this grass that would not be appropriate for barrier island and nutrients getting into the water?
That is a totally different discussion. The turf, when the 90%, when the redevelopment of Bay Oaks, that was brought up to be able to have turf, and it was deemed that it was not appropriate for usage, so the council actually did not vote for the turf, which means if you have sod, there will be certain things that need to go into the sod that will need to keep it playable for the ball fields.
Meaning things like fertilizer. And that's a yes, I take it, yeah.
Not an
Okay.
expert, I just know it needs certain things.
That's all I have.
Okay. Any more questions I can answer?
No, thank you, Allison.
You're welcome.
Counselor Veach, you have any more questions regarding?
I don't. That's just some clarifications on what this was and how if it would tie our hands going forward.
Sure. With that, then, I'll seek a motion to approve consent item agenda B.
So moved.
Got a motion
Second.
and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries unanimously. Now we have public hearings. Item A is a first reading and public hearing on proposed ordinance 23-04 entitled An Ordinance of the Town of Fort Myers Beach, Florida, replacing Town of Fort Myers Beach Resolution Number 13-23 and amending the schedule of uses for the commercial plan development zoning for the property located at 200 and 275 Estero Boulevard, Fort Myers Beach, providing for revisions to conditions of approval and other clarifications as necessary, providing for conflicts of law, scrivener's errors, severability, and providing for an effective date. It's open to the first public hearing and scheduled for second reading and final adoption on March 6, 2023 at 9 a.m.
Mr.
Sarah?
Mayor,
Yep. Yes, sir.
this item is quasi-judicial in nature since it is site-specific, so therefore, in accordance with your adopted procedures, it would be appropriate for you all to disclose any ex parte communications you may have had with regard to this particular matter, and then we'll swear in the witnesses before we start the public hearing.
Thank you, John. Vice Mayor Adderholt?
I have had no communication on this specific issue with the applicant, but I certainly have met with the applicant prior to this meeting, but not on this specific issue.
Thank you. Counselor Veach?
I have actually talked with Bill briefly. He explained to me what it is he was looking for.
Counselor Woodson?
I've had no comment.
Counselor King?
None that I'm aware of.
I've obviously driven by the site many times. I have not spoke to Mr. Wachulis about this specific item. That's it.
All right, all those who are going to testify here this morning, if you could please stand, raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Witnesses have been sworn.
Thank you, John. Sarah?
Good morning. Sarah Probst with Community Development. Bill Wachulis with JBO LLC has applied to amend the Pink Shell CPD to allow liveaboard vessels in association with the submerged land lease from DEP. The Pink Shell CPD uses currently include a dock for the use of resort occupants or for lease to non-occupants. The approved DEP submerged and land lease previously did not allow liveaboard vessels, but has been updated to allow liveaboard vessels because required pump-out facilities and restrooms are provided at the docking facility. The DEP permit defines a liveaboard as a vessel docked at the facility and inhabited by a person or persons for any 5 consecutive days or a total of 10 days in a 30-day period. Liveaboard status may not exceed 6 months in any 12-month period, nor shall any vessel constitute a legal or primary residence. The proposed liveaboard vessels are not anticipated to cause negative impacts. However, 3 new conditions are recommended for the approval of this amendment. To protect adjacent residential uses from the potential noise of liveaboard visitors, slips 1 through 4 cannot be used for liveaboard vessels unless the property at 309 Estero is purchased by Pink Shell. To clarify uses, properties, and unit numbers within the current CPD, staff is recommending a condition that the applicant clean up the existing CPD. This will ensure that going forward, the ordinances are understandable and correct. The LPA recommended an additional condition that when an evacuation is ordered, all boats must be removed from the Pink Shell Marina. The applicant indicated that they require boats to be removed upon issuance of a warning. This is more appropriate timing because an evacuation notice would be too short of amount of time to move the boats. Staff and LPA recommend approval of the request to include liveaboard vessels with conditions. I'm available to answer any questions, and the applicant is also here.
Thanks, Sarah. Just real quick, this is just a housekeeping thing. I noticed on the staff report in condition number 7 on page 98 that the word hurricane was missing. It's just to be clear that if this moves forward, that word gets put back in. It's a pretty important word. We'll bring it back. Any questions for Sarah, Vice Mayor Adderholt?
Just wanted to be clear, Sarah, this passed the LPA unanimously, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Veach?
So, could this be considered additional density for the Pink Shell, since that's like they'd have more places that people could legally stay?
That discussion did come up at the LPA. Mr. Van Ness brought up that issue that these are essentially units. In granting this, in reviewing this, staff wasn't considering it as density. However, it could be viewed that way, although not on the land, and theoretically, this group may not be bringing vehicles with them, and the density, a lot of the impacts of density are felt in traffic. So they may be utilizing the resort facilities, walkable area within the town. So yes, it will be bringing additional people that will be staying within the vicinity of the town, not on land proper, but we hadn't thought about it as density, although you could consider that. And when the CPD is cleaned up as part of the projects moving forward, this may be something we need to address.
Thank you. That's all.
Councilor Woodson?
I have one question, maybe I missed it. So is this open to anyone who wants to park their boat, or do they have to be a member of the Pink Shell, or is it open to the public?
I am not involved in how they're doing this leasing, so that's probably a question better addressed to Mr. Watulis.
I'd love to know.
Well, just hold on. We'll just make sure there's
Okay.
any, and then once you're done, Bill, she can answer that question. Councilor King?
I have none.
I just have one question, Sarah, and this might be maybe this is a question for John, but in the, would we need to, or is it because it's covered in the FDEP, packet page 118, they make reference, or 110, I'm sorry, they make reference to liveaboard shall be authorized at, and they've crossed out 17 and underlined 39. Is there a necessity for us to say not to exceed 39 based on the FDEP regulations?
You can. I don't believe it's necessary since under the terms and conditions of the FDEP lease, that's capped at that number already.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that had to be redundant.
If the town wanted to ensure that the applicant needed to come back to us if the DEP lease was changed, that might be an option. I think that that's pretty close to the limit of the number of slips, though.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I know that they covered it in there. I just didn't know if we needed to. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bill?
Good morning. For the record, Bill Whitechulis, Senior Vice President Operations for Boykin Management, the owner of the Pink Shell. Answer your question, Councilmember Woodson. We rent the slips just like a hotel unit. So we have boaters that'll, they'll hit South Seas, they'll go to Clearwater, and they'll make a stop at the Pink Shell. And we charge a nightly rate, so it's $3.50 a foot. So if you have and we can take up to a 120-foot yacht. So, I mean, the pricing, it's expensive to come on our boat, but you get all the use of our facilities just like a guest. Just to the question of the clarity on the density, we've always had the right for 41 slips. What we're here asking for is just there's a language difference between DEP and the town. Town says no liveaboards. There's no definition for liveaboards in the code. DEP says we can have liveaboards. We applied and we do all of the requirements the town has, being pump out, garbage pickup. We actually do it daily. I think the requirement for the town is weekly. We do it daily, and then having marina showers as the other requirement that we have. Well, we had, but it will be rebuilt. Same with the docks. We're in the process right now. Golden Docks in North Fort Myers is actually welding the docks up right now. We'll start receiving them over the next 60 days, and then it'll be 45 days of install for the docks. So we hope to have back on floating come July. But I'm available for any further questions. But going back real quick, the DEP states that anything over 5 nights is considered a liveaboard, and that's where the issue is, because we get boaters that want to stay a week, they want to stay 2 weeks, and that's where we just want the language to be cleared up between the two.
Thanks, Bill. Any Councilor or Vice Mayor Adderholt, any questions for Mr. Wojciechowski? No.
So currently, if someone comes and they want to stay under 5 days, they can stay on their boat, right? But if they want to stay over 5 days, they have to get a room, or is it?
Well, no. I mean, DEP says they can stay. Town says they can't stay over 5 nights. I will say we've been. If somebody wanted to stay 7 nights, we take them. I mean, it's no additional cars. It's obviously those guests are getting on the trolley. They're visiting all the facilities. And that's why we just want to make sure that we're clear and that we're doing, right. But we get people that want to. Our average length of stay on the boat is really 3 nights, but we do get occasionally, especially this time of year, that want to stay more than 5 nights. But, you know, as the definition Sarah read, over 6 months is not allowed, and that's not our business, is to have somebody, you know, being almost like a resident. That's not our cup of tea.
And that's it. Thanks.
Councilor Woodson, any other questions?
No.
Councilor King? All right, thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
We'll bring it back to the council for any discussion. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I would yield for the public comment.
Okay, perfect. We'll open it. It's a public hearing. We'll open it up for public comment. Is there anyone that cares to speak on this matter? No one? Hearing none, we'll close public comment. Bring it back.
Mr. Mayor, I move the adoption of ordinance 23-04 Pink Shell CPD amendment.
We got a motion and a second. Is this roll call, John? Yeah, to the second reading, correct? Approved to move to the second reading. You want to?
That's correct, but it does require a roll call vote. And
Okay. Vice Mayor Adahall?
Aye.
Councilor King?
Aye.
Councilor Woodson?
Aye.
Councilor Veach?
Aye.
Mayor Allers? Aye. Motion carries unanimously to the second reading, adopted for March 6, 2023 at 9 a.m. Next, we have public hearing B. It's a second and final reading, public hearing and adoption of proposed ordinance 23-02 entitled, "An Ordinance of the Town of Fort Myers Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 34, Article 3, Division 3, Section 34-638, Minimum Setbacks, Section 34-2, Definitions, and Table 34-3, Dimensional Regulations and Conventional Zoning Districts, providing for severability, codification, scrivener's errors, conflicts of law, and an effective date." We'll open the second public hearing and then vote to approve or not approve the ordinance. Sarah?
Good morning. Sarah Probst with Community Development. Do you want me to do a complete presentation?
I think it's probably a good idea, just because people may not have caught the first reading.
That's what I assumed, but I wanted to check. This morning, we're going to go over several topics related to setbacks. The ordinance language in your packet covers corner lots, porches, and stoop encroachment, decreases in the additional setback for houses over 65 feet in length based on the side street setback, removal of the 15% side setback requirement, amending the Matanzas 10-foot side setback, and allowing for new mechanical equipment encroachment. The corner lot approach that was agreed upon in June by Town Council is for a standard front setback of 25 feet, a decreased side street setback based on the lot width, and a side setback and rear setback. A property located on Estero would be required to apply the front street setback of 25 feet to the Estero-facing side of the property. There is also a provision that if the lot takes its road access from the narrower setback, the site plan must show how vehicles will not encroach into the right-of-way. The proposed language states that lots greater than 75 feet have a 20-foot setback. Lots from, this is on the side street setback, my apologies. Lots greater than 75 feet have a 20-foot street setback. Lots greater than 50 feet up to 75 feet have a 15-foot side street setback, and lots 50 feet or less have a 10-foot side street setback. In order to allow porches and stoops and to ensure that the house massing is commensurate with these decreased side street setbacks, these sections of the ordinance have also been amended. The proposed language would allow porches, balconies, and stoops to encroach half of the side street setback or 10 feet, whichever is less. The additional step back for houses that exceed 65 feet of frontage on a street has been decreased in proportion to the side street setback. For lots 50 feet or less wide, the additional setback would be 3 feet. For lots greater than 50 feet up to 85 feet wide, the additional setback would be 6 feet. And for lots wider than 85 feet, the full 12-foot additional setback would apply. The ordinance amendments also include a return to the 7.5-foot and 10-foot side yard setback. The language proposes a 7.5-foot side yard setback for lots up to 75 feet wide and an increase in the side yard setback to 10 feet for lots greater than 75 feet wide. The proposed ordinance also removes the 10-foot side street, or the side setback for Matanzas Street and Matanzas Court. This means the Matanzas area, Matanzas Street and Matanzas Court, would have the same setback as the rest of that zoning district. So it would go to a 7.5-foot or a 10-foot. It wouldn't be the required 10 feet for all lots. Additionally, the proposed language would allow existing homes to install new equipment that encroaches up to 3 feet into side and side street setbacks. New homes would be required to meet side and street setbacks, however. I'm available for any questions you may have.
Vice Mayor Adderholt, any questions for Sarah?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Councilor Veach?
No questions, just comments when we get to the council.
Okay. Councilor Whitson?
I'm good right now.
All right. Councilor King?
None.
As of right now, I don't have any as well. It's a public hearing, so we'll open it up for public comment. Anyone care to speak on this? Sir, come on up here and we'll go back to Sarah so she can touch on it, but.
Say about the 3-foot side setback.
Name. What's your name, sir?
I'm John Elwood from Cape Coral. Actually, I'm a realtor. But
And what was your question?
there was a 3-foot.
You got to move up to the mic, sir. So we
Sorry,
can.
there was 3-foot additional for lots 50 feet and under. I was just curious. I missed that. Thank you.
He is referring to houses that have more than 65 feet of frontage on a right-of-way. When there is a decreased side street setback, we're not requiring the full additional setback of 12 feet. So on lots that are 50 feet or less, it's only a 3-foot sort of bump in that's required for houses that are more than 65 feet of frontage along a right-of-way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. Hold on. We'll get back.
I just while you're up there, Sarah, just because I'm a little confused. So this is when, the side street setback, the side that is not elected to be the front, that the other rule still applies, and you've modified that. The other rule meaning that for really long houses, you have additional setbacks, and you've just modified that, so it's now de facto the side of the house doesn't have it.
Yes, that's correct. And that actually makes a lot of sense because a lot of the corner lots are deeper than they are wide. So they have a lot more length along the side road than they would along the main road, which is typically a stero. Not always, but typically. So we wanted to make sure that that additional required setback was sort of commensurate with that decreased side street setback. So we're not requiring the entire 12-foot, but as that side street setback decreases, also that bump out decreases, so that you don't end up with a house that sort of juts in and out quite a bit when you don't have a lot of width to work with.
Right. So it goes essentially from 12 to 3 feet.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. I did open public comment, so if you have questions, please ask the questions. Staff will take notes, and we'll ask the questions of staff once we get back to closing the public comment. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Dave Sturman. I'm the owner of Malachi Construction. And I have a client, John Otteson, who has a lot which is very unusual on the corner of Gulf Drive and Gulf Road. We have frontage on Gulf Drive, Gulf Road, and Estera Boulevard. And we have side setbacks on 2 other lots. So I just am kind of get clarification on what these setbacks would be, whether we get to rebuild on the old footprint of the home that was there, that was lost, or we get to how it would work out as far as setbacks, because it's a very unusual lot. And if we follow some of the guidelines that I've heard, it pretty much wipes out the lot. If we're 25-foot setbacks on either the frontage on Gulf Road or Gulf Drive, or both, that would pretty much be a very small house. So, being that it's very unusual, I spoke with Jason Smalley, and I guess there's really it doesn't really address this particular lot.
Okay. We'll get an answer from Sarah after the public comments closed.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Did you need to see this
Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll close public comment, bring it back to the council. Sarah, do you want to touch on that specific question he just mentioned? Or would it be better that he comes in and speaks to staff about it, or?
I'm going to have to look at the specific layout of the lot, and in some instances, it's going to fall under that minimum use determination and potentially a variance depending on the size of the lot. Every lot is so unique here. This is not a pre-platted subdivision community, so I'll have to look at it, and we have to take it sort of case by case.
So depending on the outcome of this hearing, there's still a path for each homeowner or landowner to be able to seek a variance or a deviation or whatever is needed to get a house built?
Yes.
Okay. Questions for Sarah? Vice Mayor Adderholt?
Nothing
Councilor Veach?
No, I'm good.
Councilor Woodson?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Councilor King?
None.
I think you've done a good job. They didn't get it either. Gotta love technology. John, you're leading in like you want to say something.
No, I was just going to make the observation that the next ordinance that is going to come up also addresses the issue of build back. So as Sarah indicated, there are a number of different avenues available to every property owner to seek the ability to build back to what they had before under the code, and ultimately, if circumstances warrant, then avail themselves of the variance procedure. What we're trying to do is address the concerns voiced by the council, the change to the percentage to going back to a numerical setback criteria.
All right, thanks, John. Is there a motion to approve the second and final reading for ordinance 23-02?
So moved.
I'll second. Is a roll call vote as well, John?
We're gonna-
Any more discussion?
Yes, as I was going to say,
There
we
you
have
go.
discussion. Thank you. Now, since this went through, I've certainly heard from a few people who said that the terracing, the tiers of these setbacks create kind of winners and losers, if you will. So there was somebody who came up and said they had a 70.5-foot wide lot, which means they have less buildable space than someone with a lot that would be smaller. I would like the council to just reconsider using a percentage for a way that doesn't harm anyone with a smaller, 100-foot or smaller lot. I just think I've heard, people say that, well, percentage is too hard to calculate, which I don't necessarily agree with, because I think using tiers is more confusing. And again, you have people who are left on the wrong side of that tier. So I would, to me, I think that maybe the 15% was a little aggressive, but if we would consider a 10% setback with a minimum of 7.5 feet, I think that would be a much smoother change and would solve a lot more problems.
Understandable. I've never been a fan of the percentage from the beginning, especially the 15%, but you make a valid point. I think, however, the staff, in my personal opinion, has done a good job of addressing the issues, meeting with constituents, listening to the LPA, listening to the council, and has put forth a very valid, workable solution to a problem that we were dealing with for a long time.
Although just keep in mind, too, that the original, because you were here too, Dan, the original reason this is brought up is there were people who were combining 2 or 3 lots. And with those, they were essentially getting much more buildable space because all the setbacks that were absorbed in the combination of the lots became buildable space. And there certainly seems to be rumors and stories about, Fort Myers Beach being the next Naples and building giant houses. And if that's, giant houses with small setbacks, if that's what the council wants, then this ordinance as it's written probably would move towards that.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll bring it back. Vice Mayor Adderholt?
Roll call.
Yes, sir.
I vote yes.
Councilor Veach?
Like I said, I'd much rather prefer the 10%, but I'll vote for this because I think it's very important for town council to provide some clarity to people moving forward on how they can build.
Okay. Councilor Woodson?
Yes.
Counselor King?
Aye.
Mayor Allers, aye. Motion carries unanimously. Public hearing number C. Second reading and public hearing of proposed ordinance 23-03 entitled An Ordinance of the Town of Fort Myers Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 34, Article 5, Division 4, Sections 34-3273, General Requirements for Residential Uses on Non-Conforming Lots, Section 34-3274, Minimum Use Determinations, and Chapter 34, Article 2, Division 6, Section 34-268, Administrative Setback Variances, providing for severability, codification, Scrivener's errors, conflicts of law, and effective date. This is a final adoption of Ordinance 23-03. Sarah?
Good morning. Sarah Probst with Community Development. The proposed ordinance before you makes several changes to sections 34-3273, 34-3274, and 34-268 to allow the redevelopment of very constrained lots. The amendments to 34, 32, 73, and 74 expand which lots are considered non-conforming but may be built on. Previously, the code called out lots smaller than 40 by 75 feet as too small for residential development. These changes expand buildable non-conforming lots to those that previously or currently have a residence on them and can receive an affirmative minimum use determination. Since the first council hearing, additional language was added to reference the Administrative Variance Setback Code section. This was added to ensure that the user is able to find that code section, which they might not otherwise be aware of. The amendments to Section 34-268, Administrative Setback Variances, include limitations on how much variance can be granted administratively. Since the first council hearing, the language has been modified to allow for a second story above flood within the same size footprint that was previously constructed. At the first hearing, staff was asked to contact the fire department regarding approved access width. The fire official indicated that the fire code refers to access roads. These access roads should be 20 feet unobstructed. However, she indicated that she understands that these access roads act more as driveways and that 20 feet may not be appropriate. Staff will need to work with the fire official to ensure that appropriate widths are required for these particular situations, and she voiced support for doing that with staff. Thank you, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
You know, just before we move on, I think I completely spaced on the last one. Anita, is this something that you would want to speak upon on behalf of the LPA? Was this one of the items? Okay, come on up. You're so quiet back there, I almost missed you.
Shocking, isn't it? No, you guys have, Anita Saracita for the record, have long agendas, and so if basically the council has agreed with what the LPA had to say, I didn't feel any need to clarify anything. But this case and the next one I will. So there was some discussion at your last meeting about allowing for a second story, and please know I'm not representing my own personal feeling on this, but rather the opinion of the local planning agency. So, like you, we had folks come before us saying, hey, my house has blown down and I can't even rebuild it because my lot doesn't meet the minimum use determination to rebuild my house. So they were left with no path forward to even recuperate what they had. So staff, we think, did a very good job in coming together with a plan that was illustrated to you that would allow a minimum use determination for these cottage lots so that folks who had a house that previously existed on those substandard, I don't mean that negatively, just, you know, too small lots, that they could in fact rebuild what they had on their lot. We did not discuss in any way allowing them to expand that use. So if if this is what you had, this is what you have the ability to rebuild. However, you would then, because you had some minimum use determination on that property, you could come in for a variance and ask for another story or ask for a bigger parcel or a bigger space, ask for whatever you want. But we didn't want to afford that by right because then you would be creating a category of property owners that had different entitlement than anybody else. You'd be giving them something that they didn't have to begin with and would have to ask for. They would have to come before the council to request that. Now they have the ability to come before the council to request it, but the LPA did not feel that they should be immediately vested with that right. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Any questions for Chairman
And
Saraceni?
we didn't know how it got to the second story. So it came up at our last meeting. It was like, well, they're basically doubling their house. And I'm sure there probably is a property owner who'd like to do that. And they can ask for a variance to do that now. Now they have a path forward. Before this, they had no path forward for anything. They couldn't have done anything. So I think that the town has gone a long way to remedy a very sad situation for these type of cottage lot owners.
Yeah, you know, Anita, I think if memory serves me correctly, the discussion came up because there were several people that spoke during public comment.
That's right.
About wanting to add the second story, and with the cost of construction.
That's okay. Yep.
That, you know, to build it at one time made more sense, but to add the additional cost of having to go through the variance process was what the discussion was about, and why it was brought up. It wasn't one singular person that was here speaking on behalf of wanting to do that. It was several. And I believe that's why the council kind of pivoted a little bit and took that direction. But you raise a very valid point, and I think there were some that weren't interested in taking advantage of building that second story, but your presentation makes a very valid point.
So I understand their point of view. All of us who are property owners who are rebuilding our homes are facing that very issue. But all of us are not going to be vested with this immediate authority to go up or expand. I certainly am not. Karen, you're not. None of us are. But by allowing that, you would be essentially saying, you know, okay, not only are we giving you this minimum use determination and the ability to build your home, we're going to give you double that. You're not doing that for anybody else on the island. Right. So, okay.
Any questions for Anita? Thanks, Anita.
Thank you all very much.
Any questions for Sarah? Go ahead. Yes.
I have a couple questions for Sarah and possibly John. This particular ordinance deals with cottages, some of which were next to the pink shell, correct? It's 320 Estero is the one property that I was queried about. Face the pink shell?
That's the general area where a lot of those are.
But this ordinance is germane to their particular situation, is that fair?
I couldn't tell you the specific lot, but if it's one of the square lots that doesn't have direct access, that would be one of them.
Very good. And so the question I had talked to a very nice person yesterday whose parents are elderly and they have one of these lots. The structure was destroyed. If this passes today on second reading and becomes policy, if they were to sell that lot, would the rights embodied in this particular ordinance pass on to the new owner? In other words, does this transfer?
It's my understanding that this would not be affected by ownership.
John, is that your understanding as well?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more challenging question to you, Sarah, because I don't fully understand this. But this person also asked me this question, and I assume you can answer it. I was able to find let's see. Do you know if the 25-foot setback on Estero Boulevard is measured from the center of the street? Meaning, would you take your tape measure to the center line and measure 25 feet, and that would be the setback? If not, where do we actually put the tape measure to start measuring the 25-foot setback? Thank you, she says.
For Fort Myers Beach, all of our setbacks start at the property line.
Okay, thank you very much.
Except for potentially on one road where setbacks are measured differently, which in court might be a little bit different. But I couldn't tell you specifically about that one. Everything else from the property line.
Well, I know she's listening this morning from Indiana, so she appreciates your kind assistance. Thank you.
And I think that's not always obvious where that right-of-way line is, right?
Yes, you really have to have a survey in order to know where that is. There's not a standard distance from the pavement that your property line starts.
Any other questions for Sarah?
Sorry, Sarah. So if we go from the premise that this is just pretty much one area on the beach that this ordinance would affect more than any place else on the beach, am I hearing that correctly, or am I not hearing that?
From the way we are seeing it, based on the small lot size, it's going to primarily apply to one specific area. It could be more lots that we're not aware of that are very, very small, but they would have to be non-conforming sizes. The majority of the lots on the island do conform, but it could apply to other lots that we're not aware of. We're doing this primarily for those very small cottage lots, though.
So,
that was the intent.
Okay, and when we're talking about having to go through the variance process, and what is the length of that? What is the cost of that? I mean, is it?
I can't tell you the specific cost. In my mind, I believe it's $1,300. Right now, we are in discussions. At the February 14th LPA meeting, we had a discussion regarding hearing processes to potentially shorten those, because right now a variance has to go to the LPA and to the council. There's an opportunity to change that process to allow it to be decided by the LPA, or to skip the LPA. There are a couple different ways that it could be done, but the process can be shortened from two public hearings to one public hearing. But I believe the cost is, or it was previously, $1,300.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Sarah? Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
We'll open it up for public comment. Yes, sir? Go, come on up. Identify yourself.
Hello, John Elwood, and I have a question for Sarah. I represent a gentleman that has a lot on a cottage lot on Estero. So let's say 25-foot setback, and let's say that cuts into his lot line considerably. I think his lot is 40 by 65. So how would he build the similar footprint he has in that space?
She'll answer that after public comment, sir.
Okay,
She's
thank
got your note. We'll call her back up.
Thank you.
Anyone else choose to speak? Okay. Who you have?
Richard Durling.
Sorry, forgot to go back to you.
Morning, Mr. Mayor,
Good morning.
Councilwoman. I'm Richard Durling with Marvin Development Corporation. I'm here on behalf of one of those non-conforming lots that are known as the cottage lots. First of all, I would encourage you to continue with the ordinance as you have revised it to allow the second story. There's numerous reasons for that, but primarily the first one is that those properties are so small that it's difficult to get a reasonable size home in a single story in a 26 by 26 foot envelope. In addition to that, there's the easement that runs alongside that property, which 5 feet of that easement is actually part of the property. So the challenge here is to get the proper setbacks. Allowing us back into that same footprint and giving us that second story allows us to have a reasonable amount of square footage. A single story is 676 square feet. Over the years, there's been a lot of non-conforming construction going on Fort Myers Beach. I think you're all aware of that. As we move forward to rebuild this community, I think it would be a benefit to all the residents to allow them a little bit of flexibility to build in compliance with the codes. To try to get bathrooms and room sizes and all these things to comply with the current code the way it is extremely challenging. There are certain sizes now for bathrooms for things like toilets and sinks and all the other things that are required for handicap accessibility of those rooms, the size of door openings and everything else. So it is a real challenge for us to design something that is usable in that little square footage. Adding the additional second floor gives us the flexibility to do that. In addition to that, the previous public hearing, we talked about the additional expense associated with building these structures. They're now going to be quite a bit higher than what they were previously. The cost currently is very high. So we want to find some parity there with the size of the structure and the cost to build these structures. You know, we want to encourage people to rebuild these communities and these neighborhoods. The choices are very limited. There are 12 lots in this particular area that we're working with. The one client who owns one of those, and they would like to see a little bit more flexibility in an effort to make it equitable for them to build and rebuild those areas versus probably the other option, which is to sell, you know, to one person who will buy all 12 lots and then create something else there that may necessarily not be as desirable as these little cottages. My company, Marvin Homes, we build the funky fish houses in Cape Harbor. I don't know if any of you have seen those. I brought a photograph of those last time I was here. They're very small footprints on lots that are even smaller than these. This lot in particular is 50 by 60.
Need you to wrap it up, sir.
But they're very small, and we build very tall in order to get the square footage we need. So I would encourage you to stay with the proposal as written, the ordinance as written. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk?
That's all I have signed up.
Anyone else choose to speak? Yes, sir.
Hello, my name's John Barrington. I'm with the U.S. Affordable Homes. I'm a real estate developer. And I was looking at the 12 cottages on the 400 block. And I wanted to see what the thoughts were if we were to combine all 12 lots and make it one parcel and build a condominium, 3 or 4 stories tall.
Is that a question?
Yeah, that's a question.
I think that's a question that you can speak with staff with after the hearing, or after the meeting today, and they could probably give you better direction than we could right now.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Kara Stewart for the record. We've heard discussion from the public that these lots are more or less constricted to one particular area, and as Richard just mentioned, there were 12 of them. By the sheer nature of no one here in the public speaking against doing this administratively with 2 stories, I would think that that would work in the favor of council, although the language has changed from LPA to council. These are the people that are directly affected by this ordinance. The impact of a variance typically is in relationship to how it affects your immediate neighbor. And in this instance, no one is here speaking against going to 2 stories. So in light of that, I would like to voice my opinion in favor of the current language for the 2nd story. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak in public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We'll bring it back to the council. Vice Mayor Adderholt?
Mr. Mayor, if I could have Sarah come back, I'm going to put Sarah on the spot. Anita raises a very interesting philosophical question in that are we, by doing this, although certainly well-intentioned, are we giving a special benefit to a small group of folks when everyone is in need of such a benefit, or maybe most folks would like such a benefit? Or is this situation so unique because of the size of the lots, from a practical standpoint, to make it feasible to rebuild, that they would need that 2nd story? And so it's unique and special, not in a sense that we're showing favoritism, but just being practical in allowing folks to build on such a small lot. This concept, these 2 concepts, somewhat butt heads, but at the same time, maybe they make sense. I don't know. Do you have a thought on that, Sarah, as we wrestle with this?
So I would say that you are sort of addressing an issue that you see is going to be coming before you. One of the variance criteria, I think that's the last variance criteria, is this such a common problem that it makes sense to change the code? And I think that may be the point that you're at with this one, is seeing that this is a common enough problem in these types of lot that this is the instance when you need to change the code. So I think you are granting this specific group something different than you are other groups, but it's based on a lot size issue of existing lots and existing homes. So it comes down to ease of that development. And do you want to encourage that development, or do you want to encourage people to potentially abandon those parcels, sell them off, do something different? Not saying that as a threat that people would do that. We don't know what they would do. But by granting this, you are potentially increasing the likelihood that they will stay and rebuild a single-family residence, because you're sort of opening that pathway for them. And the cost-benefit analysis is better when they have a second story. It's a little, I don't build. I'm not a builder, so I don't know cost versus value of these types of structures, but based on everything everyone has said, I mean, when you build a house, you want to get the benefit, the most benefit that you can get. If the cost is too high, you may choose not to do that.
So I'm going to ask you even a tougher question. So if we grant the second story, would this group of lots be more or less likely to be grouped together and sold and built as a condo? Sounds like you said it would be less likely if they were able to go up a story. I don't want to put words in your mouth, though.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of speculation there, Vice Mayor.
Yeah,
well, we're not in a courtroom, so I'm allowing her to speculate.
It would also depend on the underlying zoning district. If it's RC zoning district, they would have to rezone in order to do that, so they would have to be combining lots. So there are a lot more steps to that process if they were to choose to do that. Not to say that they wouldn't do that if the financial benefit made sense. Just that it would depend on that underlying zoning district whether they could have that use there of multifamily.
Thank you. I just think this is a helpful conversation. Thank you.
You know, Sarah, just on those lines before you walk off, I got a quick question for you. Most of these properties look like they're inside the CCCL line. What is the base flood elevation within that CCCL line? Is it 19 feet or is it?
It varies, and I could not tell you. I'm not a CFM. I apologize.
I'm just curious.
It is very high.
But I will tell you from my personal experience recently, is that the BFE that's in the flood maps, like in my example, it's 14 and 15, but now I'm told that DEP has their own height, and that height is 4.5 feet taller at 19.5 feet.
Well, and I guess that kind of leads me into my question. Based on what we'll just say 19 feet. If they're allowed to go, would we be infringing on that height restriction that's currently within our code because the initial floor has to be so high? Would
no,
we be making a decision that could potentially put us in another bad spot?
The way structure height is measured by our zoning ordinance is based on the finished floor height. Or the height required by code +1. So if somebody chooses to build higher than that, they only get an advantage up to 3 feet above that. But otherwise, you start counting the height of that building at the base flood elevation +1. So
now, so I'm just going to clarify too, because that means that the FEMA flood map base flood elevation, or are you also adding in the DEP height for that?
Well, and base flood elevation, I'm whichever is the base. So that's if FEMA is the highest or if DEP is the highest. So if you're required to build to a certain height, then the +1, and then you start counting from there. And if you choose to build higher than that, which most people along the water probably aren't, because that's, a house 25 feet in the air. That's, well, not quite that high, but so adding the additional story wouldn't cause them to be out of compliance with the zoning ordinance.
That's the question I wanted to answer.
Okay.
Thanks.
Councilor Reach? Well, I have some comments, but not necessarily questions for Sarah.
Okay. No other questions for Sarah? Thanks, Sarah. All right, we'll bring it back for discussion. Go ahead, Councilor Veach.
Now, one thing, I understand what Vice Mayor Adderholt was saying, but it also seems to me that if someone like is going to sell this property, like we already heard somebody it is, then passing this ordinance with the second floor is going to make their price higher. They're just going to get a direct financial benefit from this, which has nothing to do with future usage. Another thing I'll say is that, and I understand where these houses are, and that some of them are, as one realtor described it, nestled among some resorts. But I would say that it's basically we're trying to, and this like came up with the DeWitts, or Mr. DeWitt here, or Mr. Willis, is that using extra density, and this is additional density, adding another floor has more rooms, potentially more cars. It is additional density. If we're trying to make everyone's financial life easier by adding density, then we are going to add a lot of density on this island because there's a lot of people that are in that boat. And density affects everybody because more density means more cars. More cars means more traffic. And we have yet to come up with a solid way to mitigate traffic. Most of that's out of our hands. So my big concern is just that, is that I understand that what people have been saying, that, you know, there may be other non-conforming lots on the island, because when I hear people say about the standard Fort Myers Beach lot, I have no idea what they're talking about because it's honestly all over the map. There are plenty of places that have small non-conforming lots, and some of those may have been damaged to this hurricane for the first time. Some may be sitting idle since Charlie without ability to rebuild. And some of them are just strictly unbuildable because of they're slivers of remnants of lots. So I really think that, you know, trying to solve some of these problems with giving away additional density, whether it's to the Willises or whether it's to the people in this neighborhood, I think we're just going down a road that's going to make our traffic considerably worse. And I know there's been not only mentions of, because where do you stop? You have this. You have people who want an additional unit that are using as a vacation rental to make it financially make sense. You have, as Vice Mayor said, you have hotels that say they really can't make it feasible with the number of rooms they have. They need more density to do that. It just becomes a slippery slope, and that slope ends with a lot of traffic, more traffic than we have now. That's my biggest concern with this. And also in previous times, I've heard the council give a lot of weight to the LPA. And this would be an exception when you're breaking away from what the LPA has recommended after apparently some pretty considerable thought. Those are my comments.
Councilor Woodson?
So I go along with the fact that these people can sell these lots and bring in yet another big condo that we're trying to not do. So for the benefit of the doubt, to give our residents who are already here the opportunity to be able to build their home back and take advantage of maybe some square footage, price per square foot benefit, I still am in the camp, because I actually agreed with this at our first reading, to allow the second story.
Councilor King? I got a few things that I think the LPA brought up and the chair brought up, and I think you brought up, Bill, that make me pause and rethink this, and I'll tell you why. To your point, Councilor Woodson, whether they rebuild or they don't rebuild, we can't guarantee which way they're going to do, no matter which way this goes. We could approve that they get that second level. They could choose to sell it tomorrow because now that property is worth that much more. We can't control whether or not they're going to sell it or not sell it. So to make a decision for me, I'm not going to base it on what they plan on doing financially. She also made a very good point about specifically doing this for one location and making adjustments. And I think she did a very good job of explaining that before the storm and before this, they wouldn't be able to build back the cottages that they had before. I think it's been said several times that this council really is in favor of keeping that cottage feel and that small thing. This allows them to build back what they couldn't build back before. And I know that the one gentleman spoke about, you know, reasonable square footage to make it effective. My question to that would be, before the storm, people were living there and had no problem with the square footage before the storm. So this would allow them to build back what they had after the storm, where they couldn't do that before. So for those reasons, it really gives me pause to do this. And I really am stuck on the LPA's point, and I'm glad that she brought it up because I didn't think of that the last time that we were here, even though I watched that meeting. That do we want to set an example that we're willing to make adjustments, whether it be financial, whether it be we want to save the cottages, whatever the reasoning may be, to a specific set of group. As we heard earlier, a gentleman had a very specific, unique piece of property that even these changes don't allow him to build back what he feels is a reasonable square footage. So then do we adjust things to help out that one property owner? So those are just some things that I want to put out there for thought, but it has given me a pause as to, and it goes without saying that there still is an avenue should we decide not to approve allowing the second story through a variance, administrative variance. There still is a path to be able to do that. From what Sarah has said, and I believe what John would say if he was to say it again, there is still a path that an owner can do that. And I think that, and I'm certainly not going to speak for the rest of my members here, but it seems like there is people on the council that are favorable with trying to help out in instances like that. But to go through the process that is in place, I think no matter which way this goes, it provides an avenue for homeowners that lost their house in the storm that they did not have before. So with that, I'm going to go back to what the LPA, my suggestion is going to be to go back to what the LPA recommended, still allow the avenue for the second story. I encourage those that need that extra square footage. I certainly understand the cost to rebuild. I certainly understand the need to have more square footage, but I think the points that were made, there's an avenue to still do that. So with that, I'll bring it back to the council to see if there's any more discussion. Hearing none, I'll entertain. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I just want to emphasize to the council that the section of the code that is being amended was originally brought forward to account for where a larger lot apparently had been subdivided after the town had been incorporated. And that's the cutoff date for, previously was a cutoff date for subdivision of lots. So these non-conforming lots that we're trying to address with this change were created after the town came into existence. And that's why they weren't available for the standard minimum use determination. We're now trying to create an avenue to protect them and to allow them to rebuild. And with that, I would say to remind everyone that the section in question, which is 343274, is titled minimum use determinations, not maximum use determinations, for whatever that's worth.
I think you just did the legal speak of what I was trying to say. But I appreciate it for that. So with that, we'll entertain a motion to approve or deny or amend ordinance 23-03.
I would move to pass ordinance 23-3 as recommended by the LPA.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call. Councilor Veach?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Adderholt?
Aye.
Councilor Woodson?
Nay.
Councilor King?
Aye.
Mayor Allers? Aye. Motion carries 4-1 with Councilor Woodson dissenting.
I would just comment on that. I think your point, the mayor, for this ordinance, these people couldn't rebuild at all. So it's an important thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, this was a tough one. I certainly understand both sides, but we'll move forward. Public hearing item number D. A resolution of the Town Council of Town of Fort Myers Beach, Florida, approving, denying special exemption SEZ 202-20095 and variance VAR 202-20094 to allow the use of permanent shared parking with dimensional and design variances for the property located at 237 Old San Carlos Boulevard and providing for effective date. I lost my other page. That's it? Oh, providing for an effective date My apologies. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is a quasi-judicial item, so it would be appropriate for you all to disclose any ex parte communications you may have had with respect to this item, and then we'll swear in any remaining witnesses that need to be sworn in.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Adderholt.
I believe maybe a month or two ago, probably a couple months ago, I had a conversation with the applicant, but it was even before the LPA considered it.
Councilor Veach.
Nothing outside of listening to the LPA.
Councilor Woodson.
I've had conversations with the owner of this lot because it happens to be in my neighborhood and on my corner.
Councilor King.
None.
Other than watching the LPA and probably no less than 1 million drive-bys by this property, I have not had a conversation with the property owner. John?
Is there anyone that hasn't already been sworn in that needs to stand to be sworn in? Everyone's, please stand. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Witnesses have been sworn.
Thank you, sir. Sarah?
Good morning, Sarah Probst with Community Development. Would you guys want to hand those out? The applicant is going to hand out some new layouts. We recognized an issue with the number of parking spaces and handicap parking spaces, so they modified it over the weekend, I believe.
Thank you.
John, with the new handout and the change to what was presented, is there any legal reason that we can't proceed?
No, as long as the applicant explains what those changes are for everyone's benefit, and staff has the opportunity to review those and then answer, any questions or concerns that staff may have or that you all may have.
All right, thanks, John. Go ahead, Sarah.
Good morning, Sarah Probst with Community Development again. John Richard, owner of 237 Old San Carlos, has requested a special exception for expansion of a permanent shared parking lot in the downtown zoning district. A portion of the property was approved for a permanent shared parking lot by SEZ 2013-0006. The applicant is requesting 6 variances from the perimeter buffering, internal landscaping, parking lot location, parking lot interconnection, and the visibility triangle. The previous special exception was accompanied by a variance from all of the variances included in this application. This was variance 2013-0007. Permanent shared parking lots are a permitted use in the downtown zoning district with approval of a special exception. The current parking lot is approved for 62 parking spaces on a portion of the parcel. The area approved for the parking lot is shown in yellow on the 3rd page of your staff report. The applicant is requesting an expansion of 40 spaces in the green highlighted area on the same graphic. And that number may have changed slightly based on the new plan in front of you. In addition to the request for a special exception, the applicant is requesting 6 variances to the location and design requirements for a parking lot. The first variance request includes the internal landscaping found in section 10-416C2 to be waived. The plan does not meet the requirement to include landscaping islands between every 10 spaces. Since the LPA hearing, the applicant has provided a plan meeting the 10% internal landscaping and the tree and ground cover requirements, which they were previously requesting a variance from. The second variance request is from the perimeter buffer requirement found in section 10-416D and 34-677B3, which requires a type D buffer, 15 feet wide with 5 trees per 100 linear feet and a 3-foot tall double staggered hedge from the right-of-way. The applicant is proposing a 3-foot tall white picket fence with jasmine and corner islands with landscaping. The buffering between the single-family residence is required to be a 15-foot wide buffer with 5 trees, 18 hedges, and a fence. The applicant proposes a 6-foot tall fence with 28 cocoa plums. The owner of the single-family residence has provided a letter of support for the project. The third variance request is from location requirements found in Section 34676C, which requires parking lots in the rear yard in the downtown zoning district. A note on this request: the previous approved variance included the following condition associated with the variance. At the time of redevelopment, the parking lot variance allowing a front and side parking lot must come into compliance and be relocated to the rear of the subject property. The fourth variance request is for parking lot interconnectivity found in 34676C. This requirement is to decrease the number of driveways on San Carlos or Old San Carlos. The applicant has indicated that the adjacent property is developed in a way that would not allow connectivity. The applicant is requesting a variance from the parking lot dimensions found in Section 34-2016 1 and 2. A note on this request: the previous approved variance included the following condition associated with the variance. Applicant may utilize the parking dimensions described in variance number 5 above. However, at the time of redevelopment or the application of a building permit for the subject property, the parking space dimensions must come into compliance with all provisions of 34-2016. The LPA recommended that the applicant provide some compliant parking spaces and that some of the spaces could be compact. Since the LPA hearing, the applicant has modified the parking lot to decrease the number of parking spaces by 5. This has resulted in wider parking spaces. The plan that the applicant has provided today results in more parking spaces that meet the code requirement of 18 by 8.5 feet. 46% of the parking spaces are compliant with the code requirements. The applicant has counted the parking spaces along the southwest of the parking lot facing the canal as compliant because the user can overhang the landscaping by 2 feet. However, staff notes that those spaces are 16 feet long and the proposed lighting will not allow the user to overhang the landscaping a full 2 feet. The applicant is requesting a variance from the visibility triangle found in Section 343131. Old San Carlos Boulevard does not have a visibility triangle requirement. The applicant is proposing the same for the entrance on 3rd Street. The LPA recommended that the applicant provide a visibility triangle with a height limit of 3.5 feet rather than the code required 2 feet. The LPA recommended approval of the special exception and approved the variances with modifications. The applicant's submittal includes a landscaping plan and larger parking spaces. Staff feels that the special exception request is appropriate if the location variance is granted. Staff recommends approval of variance 1 for internal landscaping, variance 2 for buffer landscaping, variance 4 for parking lot interconnection, and variance 6 for visibility triangle height of 3.5 feet. Staff recommends denial of variance 3 for parking lot location streetward of the building in the downtown zoning district, as the parking lot is not the highest and best use. The staff report denial was recommended for, in the staff report, denial was recommended for variance number 5 to decrease the parking space sizes and aisle widths. However, the plan which the applicant has provided for you today decreases the number of parking spaces and makes much of the parking lot more compliant with the code requirements. Staff recommends approval of the parking space size variance if the lighting bollards can be moved towards the canal. I'm available for questions, and the applicant is also here.
Thanks, Sarah. Couple questions for you real quick that I have. Is there any kind of compact car size requirements that deviate from what these initial sizes that are in the code?
Our code does not contain compact car requirements. I believe the applicant was going to speak on that subject. Our code doesn't have anything for that, though.
Our code, okay. And does our code have anything for legal street low-speed vehicles as far as parking sizes?
No.
Okay. Do you know if there's, maybe this is a question for John, are there any state statutes that address either low-speed vehicles or compact cars sizes?
99% sure no on the first one. The compact car, I'm not, I would have to check, but in situations like that, generally the state defers to the local government. They haven't preempted the area.
Okay.
Surprisingly.
Yeah.
You give them time.
Easy. Vice Mayor Holt, do you have any questions for Sarah?
Nothing for Sarah. I've got a couple for the applicant.
Okay. Councilor Veach?
It's a very good presentation. So I'm trying to write down some notes. And so, I mean, this is a lot of variances. I mean, it seems, maybe this is better for the applicant. Now, you mentioned something that, that one of the variances about egress is on the Old San Carlos. So is the reason why they need this, this egress onto Old San Carlos because of does it allow smaller lanes? So they're one way? Is that the intent?
They've designed this parking lot is so that it is a one-way route. So people are going to be coming in from Old San Carlos and leaving by 3rd Street. However, the variance request I think you're talking about is the visibility triangle.
Well, I'm actually, because the egress coming in, I know it's one of the variances, and I'm just thinking that, I'm just trying to figure out why that's important to the project, and I'm assuming that the lane between, the lane in the parking lot can be narrower if it's one way.
Yes, that is correct, that a one-way lane is allowed to be narrower.
Okay. And that's probably necessary for them to get the parking spaces that they have, all right?
Yeah, the proposed aisle width does not meet the code requirement at this time. It's 18 feet, and the code requires 20 feet. So they wouldn't be able to have two-way traffic.
Would that still comply then with the fire regulations to be able to get in and out of their easement?
We did not review it through fire. However, this is an existing one, and the access from Old San Carlos is existing, I believe. So when they come in for their LDO, their limited development order, that's when it would go to fire for their review.
But we didn't at least just check to see what their requirements are? I don't know what the requirements are for a right-of-way for a fire truck.
Well, what they told me was that for an access road, it's 20 feet. However, they wouldn't consider a lot of things access roads. So this would probably be in the same way they looked at the driveways for multiple houses. It's not really an access road. There aren't a lot of people driving back and forth on it. It's more like a driveway. So I believe that they can allow narrower widths.
So whether we approve or deny this, it still would have to go, well, I guess if we approved it, it would still have to go through the fire district to be able to make sure it meets their requirements?
By granting an exception or a special exception or variances, that does not immediately qualify them for a permit. They still have to go through the rest of the permitting process.
Just wanted to make sure. Thanks. Councilor Woodson, any questions for Sarah?
Not at this point.
Thanks.
Councilor King? No. All right. Thanks, Sarah. John, applicant, who's speaking?
Good morning, Sarah Spector with Redsell and Andrus on behalf of the applicant. Before I get into my presentation, which I handed out to you, I did want to bring a few points to your attention that follow your questions and Sarah's answers. The parking plan that you have before you now shows 100 spaces. Sarah did review this. It was submitted to the city on Wednesday. We haven't made any changes since that time. The reason we were at 101, and there was uncertainty as to how to interpret the code for handicap spaces, as to whether you include the handicap spaces in that calculation. So we were at 101, which based on the town's interpretation would require us to have an additional handicap spot. So instead of doing that, we reduced the spaces by 1, kept 4 spaces, and made more of the spaces compliant. And what I want to point out there, and I'm probably going to repeat myself, but I do want to, this is important. There is an existing variance on this property that allows exactly what we're asking for. It does allow for the narrower driveways and the compact spaces, and the variance actually allows for 50% to be not compliant, and we are now at 67% compliant with this, the size of the spaces. And the only reason we're not able to comply fully is this site's already developed and has a building and a seawall that we're having to deal with. So that's why we do still have some smaller spaces. We did, though your code does not have a definition of compact, we have found a definition from another jurisdiction, and we've included that on the plan. And the compact spaces that we have, the non-compliant spaces, do meet that code provision, which is not your code provision, but it is a definition of compact spaces, and we are meeting that. So we're 67% compliant with your code, and then the rest is meets the compact space requirements. So with that, I think I've made all the points to your immediate questions, and would now like to go through the presentation, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
So following along, starting on slide 2, you'll see this property is located at 237 Old San Carlos Boulevard in the downtown area. It's been assigned a downtown zoning designation, which allows for permanent shared parking lots as a primary use with special exception approval. It is the location of the old Shipwreck Motel, the parking lot of which has been used for public parking for some time. This goes to the point that there is already a special exception and variance allowed. In March 2014, this is on slide 3, Council granted a special exception to allow for the operation of a 62-space permanent shared parking lot at this location. Those 62 spaces were shown on a plan that encompassed the property showed in yellow in these pictures, which are snippets from the respective subdivision plats. We are asking that you recommend approval of a request to extend the special exception to the lots highlighted in green. The original request was to allow an additional 40 spaces in the permanent shared parking lot. We have redesigned the site in response to LPA comments, and as I mentioned, we have 100 spaces, with 4 of those being handicap. Moving on to page 4. Additionally, we're asking you to approve several variances that will allow the expanded parking lot to operate safely and efficiently. The application and associated narrative addresses each variance in detail with specific code references, but they can be summarized as requests for parking on the side and rear of the remaining building. The original request asked for approval of no visibility triangle at the exit, but in reality, one is being provided, but it must be slightly modified to address the current layout. A buffer comprised of 4-foot tall, although I'm sorry, I think that's 3-foot tall, white picket fence with night blooming jasmine, and 90-degree spaces at 8 feet by 16 feet, with 18 feet one-way aisles and 20 feet two-way aisles. Several changes have been made to the site layout since the request was heard by the LPA to address comments at that time relative to the variances requested. I'll go through each of those in future slides. Moving to page 5, slide 5. If the special exception and variance requests are approved, several buildings will be removed, with what is outlined in red remaining. The site plan on the right provides an overview of what the site will look like, with the building that will stay and the parking spaces that will be added. An existing access point onto Old San Carlos will be removed and replaced with a single entry only point, therefore providing for a safer pedestrian sidewalk. It's not highlighted on your on the slide, but there's currently an in and out that's going to be closed, right where it shows where there's the circle and the handicap spaces. So this will only be one entrance in and one exit out. The only exit will now be via 3rd Street, which keeps traffic moving in a forward pattern and relegates exiting vehicles to a much less pedestrian used street. Additionally, the handicap spaces have been located immediately adjacent to the sidewalk, facilitating a handicapped individual's exit from his or her vehicle and allowing for a more fluid and shortest path of travel along Old San Carlos to the entrance into the building or to other downtown areas. Moving on to slide 6. As noted previously, the property is located in the downtown district. The primary purpose of the downtown district is to serve as the center of pedestrian-oriented commercial activities. Accordingly, the downtown district has been designed to operate based on a park once philosophy, with Old San Carlos Boulevard serving as Main Street. The future land use the future land use provision relative to pedestrian commercial is set forth on slide 7. This property has been given a future land use designation of pedestrian commercial, and it identifies Old San Carlos as an intense activity center. The town's comprehensive plan not only encourages, but requires pedestrian-friendly design in the pedestrian commercial district. The request before you today is in furtherance of this policy in that it will provide for the expansion of a centrally located parking area with enhanced features to encourage visitors to park once and go. Sarah mentioned in her presentation that there are 2 conditions from the previous approval that staff commented on in the staff report. The staff considers these to be germane to the request and concludes that what is being proposed is redevelopment, and because it's redevelopment, no more variances are allowed on the site, and it must be developed in accordance with all code provisions. However, there's nothing in the applicable resolution that prohibits future variances, either from us asking for them or town council granting them. There's similarly nothing in the code that allows for one bite at the apple, which is what the staff's interpretation would lend itself to. Even so, we do not believe that you have to go that far with the analysis because, based on our reading of the code, we are not proposing to redevelop the property. There are 24 instances of the word redevelopment in the code, but not one includes a definition. The provision relative to redevelopment in the section of the code addressing variances refers to redevelopment as the act of building back, in that it refers to complying with setback and height regulations. Site work alone, which we're proposing here, is not contemplated. Moving on to slide 9. Additionally, as it relates to the application of commercial design standards to redevelopment, the code provides that they only apply to newly built buildings and to substantial improvements to those newly built buildings. Here we are only asking to remove some of the existing buildings with nothing to be built back in their place. Because we are not proposing to redevelop, this will not act as a trigger. Now I'm going to go into the variances and highlight what changes we've made since the last time this was heard, which was before the LPA. And as I went through them before, there are 6 variances, which does appear to be a long list, but it can be summarized as a list that allows for typical operation of a downtown parking lot and requests variances to address code requirements relative to landscaping, location, and logistics. In the way of background, the variances were originally requested in 2014 to allow for the continued use of a parking lot consistent with the parking across the street, which had been approved as part of a commercial plan development. After the town adopted its land development code, a request was made to rezone to a conventional zoning district, but with variances to allow for the parking lot to continue in operation without necessitating a redesign to meet the conventional zoning district regulations. These same variances, including reduced parking stalls and aisles, as well as reduced landscaping requirements, were applied to most of the property that is issued today with the 2014 approval. However, we have in fact reduced the number of non-conforming parking stalls and added landscaping in this application, therefore improving what you previously approved. So now I'm going to walk through the 3 L's as I've highlighted them, with the first being landscaping. And I do want to let you know that we do have the landscape architect here, and we have the plans that he's put together following the LPA meeting here for you as well to see, but you've also have them as handouts. All right. So with regard, jumping forward to slide 12, this is the first landscaping variance. The code requires a type D buffer between a right-of-way and parking. We are requesting a variance to allow a slightly reduced buffer consistent with other parking areas on the island, including those located at 150 Crescent, 1397, 1478, 1510, and 2440 Estero Boulevard. Staff noted that the original request did not specify the type of landscaping proposed, and the LPA suggests that we provide examples of what will be planted. And as I mentioned, you've now been provided with a proposal that shows exactly what is going to be proposed. And then we have included a picture of what the jasmine will look like once it grows. I know that Chairman Saracita had remarked that she likes to see what it's actually going to look like, and we'd like to think that's what it's going to look like when it grows. So that's I kept that picture in there. With regard to landscaping, the same section of the code outlining buffer requirements between the parking lot and right-of-way also includes requirements relative to internal landscaping. As Sarah mentioned, I won't go through this because we now comply with the internal landscaping requirements, in that we are only required to have 11 trees, and we're proposing 14. And then we're also, the LPA had remarked, and we didn't have an opportunity to respond, there was a comment regarding landscaping along Old San Carlos and access. So you'll see I've circled in red the 2 areas that there'll be a break in the landscaping, so that you don't have to walk all the way around. You can just walk through directly to Old San Carlos right there. Accordingly, while we are asking for a variance to the perimeter buffer requirements, the plan provides additional landscaping over and above what is required by the code as compensation, and also takes into account vehicle and pedestrian circulation. And with that, I'm going to ask the landscape architect to come up and tell you a little more about the plan.
Good morning. For the record, Greg DeSerio, registered landscape architect with Dave Jones and Associates, a local landscape architectural company. What we've provided, the landscape plan was based on selection of plant material that is either native or conducive to the site. It is salt tolerant, mostly drought tolerant, does provide some color. We were conscious of the desire to keep the views to the water open while still screening the parking. So we have a mixture of like I said, native and adaptable plant material. This is the actual landscape plan that specifies the quantity, sizes, locations, and all that. And to make it easier, this is just an illustrated graphic of the type of vegetation proposed. And where it's proposed on the site. And then lastly, this is a view looking as if you're standing up from San Carlos, looking at the existing building there, looking across the parking lot. We utilize sable palms clustered to help provide some shade and canopy, and they do well in this type of situation. So be happy to answer any questions at the end or now if you have any.
Real quick question for you. You mentioned that it says in here 4-foot fence, but you're talking about a 3-foot fence? I just wanted some clarification because it says 4 foot, but I thought you said 3 foot.
I did say 3 foot, and the owner, Mr. Richard, has said whatever you want is what he'll provide. So one thing when I get to it, when we talk about the visibility triangle, is even if we do go with the 4-foot fence, it'll be lower in that little square where the visibility triangle overlaps with our exit. So next I'll just go through the location. This is one of the...
Just a real quick question.
Yes.
Sorry to belabor on this, but where did he go? There he is. And the plantings, I apologize, I am not a green thumb. I don't understand how high some of these things grow. The stuff that you're proposing inside the fence there, that won't grow taller than the fence or will go taller than the fence?
The Confederate jasmine is vine, and it'll grow on the fence itself. It won't get above it. I mean, it may get a few inches above it.
Okay.
Just for your code requires, your typical code requires a double staggered hedgerow maintained at a 3-foot height. I would recommend that the fence be somewhere between 3 foot and maybe 42 inches. One thing I was trying to do in the development of this plan is also keep in mind the safety of all the pedestrians down there and keeping some material low so that it doesn't get overgrown and causes some sightline issues.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Is, before you leave, since I know we like people going back and forth with the mic a lot today.
Yeah.
So is any of this landscape part of a stormwater absorption plan, or is this strictly going to be a concrete parking lot that's going to go into the town stormwater handling system?
The civil engineering plans, which I think are on the first sheet you have there, they are planning for the stormwater will be subsurface with chambers underneath the asphalt, similar to what's done on Estero Boulevard or some other developments in town with the subsurface. So this is is not part of the stormwater management system. It's strictly landscape aesthetics.
And so then any overflow from that will go into the stormwater system, kind of like Estero Boulevard does.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, this, moving on to location, this next variance is one that staff had mentioned that they do not recommend approval of. I would point you to section 34676B, which succinctly states that off-street parking lots shall be placed in rear yards. However, it does not contemplate the site layout that we have here, where there's no building to park behind. As noted previously, only the building outlined in red will remain. The buildings outlined in blue will be demolished, or already have been, by the storm, and nothing is currently proposed to be built in their place. Rather, this area will be used for parking. With no building to park behind, it makes this requirement impossible to meet. With the current condition of the site, it is difficult for us to come back with a new building at this time. The site has been strategically planned for the potential of true future redevelopment, inclusive of on-site drainage and the exit onto 3rd Street. That being said, as outlined here, and as Mr. DeSario pointed out, the proposed landscaping includes a row of cabbage palms that will provide some buffer akin to a building in this location.
Just to hit on a point you made, so you're kind of implying that this parking lot is an interim measure until the entire property is redeveloped?
Well, yeah, and it's not ready to be redeveloped right now. It's going to be to continue with the uses that are on it. So we're just looking, there's no plans for redevelopment at this point. Okay. The next variance is with regard to parking lot interconnection, and this is simply a matter of layout. There are no parking lots behind any of the buildings, and there's no access point behind those buildings between 3rd Street and Estero Boulevard. So we're asking for a variance to not require parking interconnections. Finally, moving on to logistics. We're on page 18 now. This first variance is with regard to the parking dimensions. The variance to allow for smaller parking spaces is needed due to the existing site design and building location. You'll see here on the slide at the bottom right-hand corner, that's where we have the definition of compact and how our smallest space meets the definition of compact at 16 feet by 8 feet, and that only comprises 29% of the lot. All existing and proposed spaces are placed at a 90-degree angle, accordingly based on the code requirements. All spaces must be 8.5 feet wide by 18 feet long. Additionally, one-way drive aisles are to be 20 feet wide, while two-way drive aisles are to be 22 feet wide. Of the 100 spaces proposed, 67% meet the code requirements, and an additional 4 spaces are only short by half a foot. Moving on to my pages are different, so that's 19. The other 29% of the spaces are 8 feet wide by 16 feet long. While some buildings are being removed, the main shipwreck building will remain, which leaves reduced space between the building and the existing seawall. The same seawall and the adjacent lagoon dictate the need for a variance in this location. As noted in the previous table, the aisle widths associated with 90-degree parking spaces are 20 feet for one-way traffic and 22 feet for two-way traffic. The location of the existing improvements similarly dictate the need for slightly smaller drive aisles, 18 feet for one-way traffic and 20 feet for two-way traffic. It is important.
So just another kind of clarification
Yes.
here. So looking at some of the old pictures,
Yes.
it looked like this area behind the shipwreck building previously only had one row of parking spaces, and now you're trying to put in 2.
It's approved for 2.
Okay.
I know the area only shows 1, but the variance that was approved previously does allow for the 2 rows of parking.
Thank you.
With smaller spaces. Mhm. It is important to note here that as it relates to parking behind the building, well, this goes to the same point. The previous variance allows greater nonconformity than we are requesting here today. That is, as it stands today, the site can be improved with smaller stalls behind the building than what is shown here. The previous approval allowed for 50% of the spaces to be non-compliant, and we are reducing that number to 29%. Accordingly, if you approve this variance, you will be overriding a more liberal approval granted in 2014. On slide 20, you'll see the visibility triangle requirements from the code. There are two different visibility triangles, one to address corner lots and driveways on Estero Boulevard, and one to address other driveways and parking lot entrances. While the subject property is technically a corner lot, Section 34-662B7 states that build-to line requirements shall take precedence over any buffer or setback requirements imposed by other portions of the code. So if you turn to page 21, Section 34-674, which you see here, addresses building placement as it relates to Old San Carlos and recognizes that the sidewalks and on-street parking lanes will provide the necessary visibility. Accordingly, it is only the 3rd Street exit that has a visibility triangle requirement. And as such, it is appropriate to look at the visibility triangle that applies to all other driveways and parking lot entrances. You'll see I have drawn, so the visibility triangle that's applicable to driveways and other parking lot entrances is 5 feet in by 100 feet. So that red triangle that I've drawn in there is the visibility triangle. It was shown there, I just highlighted it so it was easier to see. The little square, the blue square, shows where there's a slight overlap between the visibility triangle and the exit. And the reason why we're wanting to do that is because we're trying to make this as easy as possible for people to maneuver. And right now, it's straight out if you drive. In order to avoid the visibility triangle, we'd have to jog this up, which would make it less easy to move around. So we're asking for a slight variance for the visibility triangle. And again, within that visibility triangle, if there's a portion, and there is a portion along that side, we will have reduced landscaping in that area to preserve the view for those exiting. Right, moving on to slide 22. The staff report also addresses neighborhood compatibility and concludes that parking is, or seems to conclude that parking is not needed in this area because parking lots appear to cover more area of the downtown than any other land use. Notwithstanding, as has been highlighted earlier, both the applicable zoning and future land use designations specifically identify this area as one that is to be pedestrian friendly and encourages a park once philosophy. The town's own comprehensive plan encourages this type of parking so that each individual use does not need to provide parking. Additionally, as you'll see on slide 23, the code contemplates even more parking in this area of downtown in that 3 different locations in the immediate vicinity of the property have been identified as potential locations for parking garages. Okay. We're now on slide 24. Before the LPA hearing, staff recommended denial of both the special exception and all proposed variances. With LPA support, staff has now recommended approval of the special exception, but in the conclusory paragraph that you see on your slide, they have recommended denial of all variances. However, if you read the staff report in the paragraphs leading up to the conclusion, staff actually recommends 4 of the 6 requested variances. Both landscaping variances, the location variance relative to interconnections, and the logistics variance relative to the visibility triangle. Thus, staff has actually recommended approval of variances 1, 2, 4, and 6. The only variances it does not recommend approval of are number 3, relative to the parking lot location, and number 5, relative to parking dimensions. However, as noted previously, the existing conditions of the site dictate the need for these variances. As a reminder, variance 5, the only variance the LPA recommended denial on, is actually an improvement over the previous approval where town council approved a 50% nonconformity as to parking stall sizes, and we are proposing to reduce the nonconformity to 29%. And as it relates to the location requirement, variance number 3, the code will require that we build a building simply so that the vehicles can be parked behind it. Without this variance, that portion of the lot would remain vacant because there are no current plans to redevelop. As a whole, we have demonstrated that this site is uniquely situated in an area of the town that has been identified as appropriate for shared parking, with the necessary variances to accommodate the downtown building requirements, such as the build-to lines that take precedence over setbacks and visibility triangles, provided safety can be ensured. The site has been designed with safety in mind, especially with the traffic pattern, keeping traffic moving in a forward momentum, with the only entrance on Old San Carlos and the only exit on 3rd Street. Based on the foregoing, we respectfully request that you approve both the special exception and all requested variances, which will result in a safer parking scenario than approved in 2014. And with that, I will entertain any questions that you may have.
Sarah, any questions for Vice Mayor Adderholt? Do you have any questions for Sarah?
I have a question for the applicant, unless you want to speak for the applicant. I think it might be better for the applicant.
Sure.
John Richard for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Richard. I have a couple questions. I really like the way the traffic flows in terms of going in and exiting. It seems like that'll really help Old San Carlos move more fluidly. I'm curious, though, as you drive down Old San Carlos, you're going to, before you actually see the parking lot, you're going to see the entrance, but you won't, I'm talking about if you're a tourist, you won't see the parking lot itself. Will there be signage there so people will know it's a parking lot?
I would love to put as much signage there as possible.
Well, up to a point, I guess. But I guess it's a sort of a leading question, and that signage won't be quite as necessary if you plan on participating in the town's parking app, as we're trying to make it friendly for not only for the town but for any other owners of parking lots on the island. I know it's probably, I'll yield to our town manager. Poor guy probably hasn't even touched this particular issue because he's got more pressing matters. But we were pretty close to exploring a parking app that would help anybody who visits our island know where the available spots were. And we'd certainly share the software with businesses. I just want to make sure you're in the loop on that and that you're open to participating in that so people, again, are not just driving around, clogging up traffic, looking for parking spots. They can use their app, identify your lot, see there's 7 spots open, head over there, know exactly what's going on. Is that something you're open to and you're building that into your model?
Yes, I think you make a very valid point. A parking lot and getting people off the street and parked is super important. Obviously, I'd be very open to listening to the town's plans as far as apps and any other thing that's going to help generate and get people off the road parked. Park once, walk around. That's what the comp plan says.
And I appreciate that very much. In terms of your parking strategy, in terms of enforcement, do you plan on charging by the hour, by the day? How do you plan on managing?
That would be all up in the air. I would, I'll invent it. I've been doing this for, how many years I've been across the street doing it, been doing this here, so I would be, what's going to work?
And I'm not telling you how to do it. I just didn't know if you had a plan already. In other words,
I invent it as it goes along. Right
Okay.
here, first thing I have to do is get approval.
Do you have
then we can go to the next step.
in your mind, are you envisioning a parking attendant, a human on location, or will it be primarily computerized?
I envision a human. I envision machines. I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning envisioning stuff.
Okay.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
Since you're up here, if I can just piggyback on it. So it seems to me, thinking the way that I would behave if I was a stranger driving down Old San Carlos, that I might drive by your alley, the entryway, and then go down and notice the parking after I'm past the shipwreck, and then try to figure out how to get in. It almost seems to me logical to have it the other way, where people would go through, once they saw the parking spot, then they would go on 3rd and enter.
Well, I'm open to going either way. I mean, when we approve this, the parking lot could go either way. But if we look at it, when the people exit, my thought on it was, because we can go either way. My thought on it was that you park, and then when you leave, you go on 3rd Street. You're not on San Carlos, and you go down 3rd, and you go left on you get on the bridge and go home.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have the same challenge of not noticing the lot until you're past it, again, for people who are from out of town. But I'm also concerned if people are exiting on Old San Carlos, that could be disruptive to the traffic flow on Old San Carlos.
I agree with that, and I think staff was very, had a condition in there, I agree with 100%, that to have signage out there letting people know that it's a parking lot.
Just reclaiming my time, Mr. Mayor, I would Just last question would be on the picket fence, and I don't know anything about aesthetics, although it looks very lovely, and I think the LPA did a nice job of setting some parameters for this property. The picket fence, if it's 3 foot high, and if it's an actual picket fence, and there's a lot of folks who go up and down on those sidewalks that have had numerous adult beverages. If they were to fall or be pushed, that could be somewhat of a spearing mechanism if they fell on the picket fence. I'm wondering if 4 foot might be from a risk management standpoint, and maybe aesthetically might be a little safer for the.
I'm very happy to go whatever height you
I don't
want.
know the answer
Yeah,
to that. I'm just thinking
yeah.
out loud. Yep.
But they would come home smelling like jasmine.
Fair point. That's all I've got. Thank you.
I'm just curious if you were speaking from personal experience there.
I know, just, well, no comment.
Councilor Veach, any questions for the applicant? John, don't run off yet. There might be more.
Yeah,
more No.
I'm just concerned about the long-term plans because you've been downtown a lot. You a long time. You've got a lot of interest down there. It just seems to me that best and highest use is that I'd be interested to know what your longer-term plans are because that property is on Old San Carlos. It's got water behind it. It seems that there's a lot of potential uses that could be done with that property, and a parking lot to me as an interim. I can understand as an interim measure, but it seems to me that now you're creating a dead zone for pedestrians. Say it's all pedestrian friendly, but when you're walking by there, there's really nothing of interest for a pedestrian when there's a parking lot. And the people down at the end of the street, the businesses have complained about that road being kind of dark and abandoned, kind of feeling abandoned.
Well, I feel as the street, I don't see that as a dead zone myself. We have the one shipwreck store. Bill from SOB is probably going to come forward and build something there. The street's going to be vibrant. So I'm there all the time. It's not a dead zone now. So I just don't know how to answer the question.
So do you envision, and I don't want to put you on the spot or make anything a requirement, that you are going to redevelop the entire lot to something?
Okay, me personally, over the next 100, 200 years, I would bet you that lot gets redeveloped. But me personally, at 65 years old, I'm going to have all my options open. I could wake up tomorrow, 2 o'clock in the morning, I could wake up and say, I want to build a building there. Or I could sit there and say, no, everything's working. I'm going to make it work for the town, work for myself and make it work for the town. I want to do it right.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Woodson?
Well, I just have a couple of comments. So to address the, driving past the parking lot and knowing where the shipwreck store is, you could easily put signage that says parking 1 block down, that type of thing, so people know where the entrance is. Personally, because I live down 3rd Street, I would like to see the exit be on 3rd Street, because then you just go straight across to Crescent, come around, and you're off the island. It's the easiest traffic flow. When I look at these plans, it's like a park with all of the flowers and the jasmine and the palm trees, and you look across the street on 3rd Street to the sandy, desolate parking lot that's there now for $5 a day. Maybe this could be an encouragement to do more with the other parking lots that we have on the island.
I did thought I was building a parking lot at first, but I agree with you. It feels more like a park, but I'm very happy about that. I'm very happy to have a beautiful parking lot for Fort Myers Beach.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Councilor King? Don't run off, John. I got just a couple questions for you. Hold on, John. Hold on. You're not getting off that easy. I agree with Karen. I think the landscaping that you've put forth on this is well thought out, and it does look like a park, not necessarily a parking lot. There's a couple suggestions, and take them for what they're worth, that I would like to see incorporated if it's possible. As we work with apps and we work with other alternative means of transportation for people to get around on the island to help with the congestion, if there's a way that you could incorporate some parking for low-speed vehicles, I think that would benefit you. You could fit more in one spot versus, but I don't know if that would require it being an extra spot or how that works out, but it seems like we're seeing more and more people use those, as well as bike racks and water fill stations. If there's a way that you can incorporate some bike racks there to encourage people, parking their bikes and locking them up is very difficult around the Times Square area. So if there's something you could do in there to help alleviate that, to encourage people from the south end maybe to ride their bikes up and spend the afternoon, and maybe give them a place to fill up the water. Just suggestions, but I know you like to think outside the box. I just thought I'd throw those out there and see
Bike
what you
racks are pretty easy. There's a lot of opportunity for them.
Those are the only questions I had. Those are the only suggestions I had. Thank you, John. Okay, we'll bring it back. Madam Saracita, would you like to come up and speak?
I guess you can still call her mayor, right?
Nope. Anita Saracita for the record. I'm laughing at all the park talk because there was a lot of that. I don't think anybody has been in Times Square as long as John Richard and myself. We've both been a part of the town since its inception, and I have to tell you, so when I was coming to speak on this morning, I called Kara Stewart because I just wanted to make sure that I wanted to see what changes had been made. The LPA passed unanimously the special exception, and to your point, Councilmember Veach, this is one of those cases where it's like, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time? We took it in pieces because it's a big, complicated case, really. You've got 6 variances and a special exception. We approved the special exception unanimously, but on a board where you've got an attorney, 2 engineers, a planner, a realtor, then Scott and me, there was a lot of discussion about the details of the variances. And Pat Vaness brought up a very good point to your point, Karen, and your point, Dan. This is an opportunity to up our game. Pat kept saying, let's up our game, especially for those people that live in that neighborhood. What the applicant, I believe, has effectively done with the changes between the LPA and your presentation today has transformed what could have just been an ordinary place to some place that ups the game and hopefully will encourage adjacent property owners and other folks who come in for the same type of application to meet this standard. Because though I don't know if it really gets to a park, but it looks tremendous. There's, you all have seen enough cases now. A lot of times, I said this to Ms. Spector during the hearing, people like to show you pretty pictures. And we saw a beautiful picture of a charming picket fence with night blooming jasmine overflowing, and you could smell it from the picture. And I said, don't show me this picture if this isn't what it's going to be. Don't show this and then plant a 2-gallon bucket of night blooming jasmine every 10 feet. So I think what they've done is stepped up their game tremendously, and I believe that they have met, by and large, the requests that the LPA set upon them in the variance provisions. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Other than that, I'm glad to be here to support this applicant.
What was the LPA's opinion of the variance for the best and highest use?
It's kind of strange, Bill, because, everybody knows that, it's true. There is a lot of parking space available in Times Square, but it is probably the biggest thing that's needed. John made a comment that stated in the comp plan that it's park once, get people out of their cars and let them move around. And so I think that what we felt was that there already exists parking, but by creating this better plan, and in fact it is a more conservative plan than the previous, they made a comment about, it's actually making it an existing variance better. I think that this was what we felt, maybe not in 20 years, it might not be the highest and best use, but for the current redevelopment prospects in that area, we felt that it met the criteria.
Any other questions for Anita? Thanks, Anita.
Thank you all for being here. This was a pleasure, and good luck.
Thanks. And you don't have to lie to be our friend, Anita. All right, we'll bring it back to council. Oh, actually, it's public hearing. We've got to open it up for public comment. Is there anyone that chooses to speak on this case? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Now bring it back to council. Is there a motion or any discussion further on Resolution 23-17 for 237 Old San Carlos?
I wonder, because I know Vice Mayor Adderholt made a point about the parking app. Is that something we can mandate as a provision, participation in that for approval of these variances?
No, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if you could do something we haven't even implemented.
I want to make sure that the council, I think you all understand, but based upon all the comments, including the staff presentation, is that the project, the special exception, and 4 of the, how many variances are?
6.
6. That 3 of the variances are now being recommended by staff for approval. And so what is before you potentially for additional discussion is whether or not the applicant meets the 3 remaining requests for variance, and for you to all decide that and then ultimately approve with or without conditions, and we'll all put this one behind us.
Okay, Jen, hold on a second. I think there's only 2 of the 6, correct? Sarah, with the testimony that you've heard here today and with the changes that the applicant has made, has that altered the staff's position on variance 3 and variance 5?
Staff is recommending approval of,
You're requiring approval on everything except for variance number 3, the parking lot location, and variance 5, 34-20161 and 2, aisle and parking space sizes.
yes, and I want to note that based on the changes that they proposed by reducing the number of parking spaces, they have become more compliant. However, I do want to point out that there's a difference in how staff views their compliance versus how the client views their or the applicant views their compliance with the parking lots or parking space sizes. The ones that face the canal, they're calling those compliant because theoretically they can overhang that landscaping by 2 feet, which gives them an 18-foot space, is what they're saying. However, there are bollards in the way in their current plan, so they couldn't overhang 2 feet, it appears. So I have a concern with accepting the way the language, or basically the table that they provided. Staff doesn't concur that that is the breakdown of the number of parking spaces that are compliant. It appears that 42 spaces are 18 by 8.5 plus the 4 ADA.
Okay.
So just for clarification. Also regarding the, yes.
The practical implications of your concern is that parking spots would not be deep enough, or what's the practical implication of your concern?
Well, they're claiming them to be 18-foot spaces, when in fact they are 16 feet of pavement. And yes, they can overhang the landscaping, but there's a bollard in the way, so they...
What's the practical adverse impact of that of the concern you raise, I guess, is my question.
With the aisle being less than the required width and both parking spaces on either side being less than the required width, if you have a large vehicle, you're going to have a difficulty getting in and out and parking properly. You know, you have a giant truck, it's going to be hanging out into that aisle.
How far behind the bollard, or how far are the bollards behind what would be, I'm assuming, that concrete stop that we all are so familiar with?
There wasn't a measurement, and it doesn't look like they're proposing stops, and that's part of how they can do that overhang. There wasn't a measurement for the distance to the bollard. It looks like a foot, maybe. It might be more than that.
Vice Mayor Honorable, I think the issue is the width, not necessarily the depth.
Yeah, in this one, it is the depth. They reduced the number of parking spaces by 1 there to get 8.5 feet in width, so they are wide enough. And if you choose, they do meet the compact space size that they provided here. I'm just saying, per staff's evaluation of it, we see that differently. It's not actually a compliant space.
And I'm assuming, and I'm sure the applicants will answer this question, but I'm assuming there's not a bollard behind every single space?
No.
So
There.
theoretically, could they put a sign up there that says that space is not for trucks or compact only to help alleviate some of the staff's concerns?
Have you ever seen a big truck decide to park in a compact space because it's a big truck and it can?
I would never say I've ever tried that.
I'm just saying, it's a suggestion, and oftentimes if there are no other parking spaces, anyone will park there.
Sure.
And it's certainly at your option. I just wanted to clarify that that was staff's view of that. I also wanted to point out on the visibility triangle, they're only showing one side of the visibility triangle. There's also, it would have to come in 5 feet and out 100 from the exit. So for visibility from the person leaving, not just from Old San Carlos down 3rd, but also from the exit going towards Old San Carlos and the exit going the opposite direction down 3rd
So
Street.
you're saying at that exit, that would have to be 5 feet is what you're requesting from staff?
That 3.5-foot height that is was agreed to in the visibility triangle. Yeah.
Okay.
So although the 42-inch, wait, is 42 inches 3.5 feet?
Yes.
Yeah, so that gets you there. So don't go for a 4-foot fence, but a 3.5-foot fence would be fine in that location to meet
Okay.
that requirement.
All right, perfect. Any other questions for Sarah? Will the applicant come back up? Looks like they want to opine here on some of this.
Sarah Spector with Redstone Andrews for the applicant. You can see, I think you have this plan, there are 3 little tiny circles, and only 2 are actually in front of spaces. 1 is between 2 spaces. Those are the bollards, and lighting will have to be approved during the site plan phase of this, and if they need to be removed or moved, we're happy to do so, because there is a code provision that specifically allows for 2 feet of landscaping to count towards the 18 feet of the parking space depth. So that's why we did include that. And staff had not mentioned the bollard thing, or we would have addressed that in our presentation.
Are those existing bollard lighting, or are they new? Not existing, okay.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? I think they've addressed the issues. It seems to me that you can work through the final design with the questions and the discussion that have happened here. So with that, is there a motion to approve or deny Resolution 23-17? Vice Mayor, look like you're...
So moved.
Second.
We'll open it up for discussion. I have just a quick question. Are you approve the way staff has recommended denying variance 3 and 5, or with approval of all the variances and the special exception?
I believe it's as presented by the applicant today. It sounds like they've really made a good effort to address all of the staff's and the LPA's concerns. So I would say, I defer to John on the proper phraseology, but I would say as presented today to the council.
John, does that suffice to?
I think that for clarity purpose, it's motion to approve with granting all 6 variances.
And special exception.
And I'm sorry, granting the special exception together with all the 6 requested variances.
I would make that motion based upon the town attorney's summation.
And Councilor King, would you like to amend your motion or your second?
Yes.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
I would just say, part of me really has this envisioning of something like a Wahoo Willie's along the street that would give more appeal. But then I'm also very conscious that it's not my land, not my choice what to do for a business. I know that we need parking. I'm not a huge fan of having just areas of parking where people are walking. But I would go with an approval just because, they made an effort, and it's really not my property to decide what I'm going to do for a business.
Fair enough. Is this a roll call vote again, I assume? Yes, okay. Vice Mayor Adderhall?
Aye.
Councilor King?
Aye.
Councilor Veach?
Aye.
Councilor Woodson?
Aye.
Mayor Allers? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. It moves us to the administrative agenda. Resolution 23-16 entitled "A Resolution of the Town Council of Town of Fort Myers Beach, Florida, accepting the ranking of Grubbs Emergency Service LLC, Grubbs as the top-ranked responsible and responsive bidder to ITB-23-08-CD, Estero Island Emergency Berm, approving an agreement between the town and Grubbs for the construction of Estero Island Beach Emergency Berm, authorizing the execution of the agreement and expenditure of budgeted emergency and/or grant funds by the town manager and providing an effective date." Anyone here? Is Chad here? Anybody here to speak? You have anything you want to add to this, Chad? Maybe just give an update as to how this got back on our agenda for just the public to understand. Can't hurt. Where would you like to do it, John?
As the council recalls, at the last meeting where you had the special call meeting, the day before, we received a notice of bid of intent to protest the bid, which placed everything on hold. At that meeting, that special call meeting, the town council requested or directed me and administration to reach out to Bergeron Land Company, which was the company that submitted the notice of intent to file the bid protest, to see if they were willing to withdraw based upon some comments of staff. We had those communications, and they were successful, and Bergeron went ahead and withdrew their notice of intent to protest the award of the bid. So the item is now back before you for award and execution.
All right, thanks, John. I guess he covered what I asked you up here to do, but unless you want to say something, Chad. Any questions for Chad since we made him walk up here? What's that?
Mardi Gras.
Yeah, nice.
I noticed
How'd
that.
you get the
I
beads,
noticed
Chad?
that.
How'd you get the beads, Chad?
I ordered them, unfortunately.
Thanks, Chad. We'll bring it back. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 23-16?
So moved.
Got a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of passing Resolution 23-16 signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries unanimously. Brings us to final public comment. Anyone have anything they'd like to talk about? Okay. Hearing none, we'll close final public comment. Town manager's items.
Thank you, Mayor. As you may have been briefed last week, that marked the halfway point for Chris and my engagement with the town, and we have certain milestones that we're trying to work through, including hiring a town manager and several other things that we want to get accomplished by May 15th. But with regards to the glide path to town manager selection, I think we've explained to everyone that we will, at the March 9th M&P, review the council's policy for how to do that selection, and if there's any modifications or not to that policy, and that really will kick off the process to take us through hopefully a selection on April 17th at that council meeting. So also we're working on hiring a utilities manager and HR manager. Our finance director again starts March 15th. So there's good progress on those positions. An appraisal on town hall is due February 28th, so hopefully we'll be determining the new town hall location for the next 3 years until we're built again.
So this is an appraisal for the commercial building that has potential.
Correct.
to be a
Sorry, yeah.
Temporary town hall. Okay.
That's right, yeah.
The commercial building or Bay Oaks?
No, commercial building.
Okay.
Yeah, we're doing a real estate appraisal on the value of that property. I'll then bring back to you to see if that's something we're interested in making an offer on or not. April 30th, we were conducting our compensation classification study. That's due April 30th. And a couple other things I'd like to work on are our HR employee manual, make some revisions there, bring to you an interim budget, and then with regards to, there's been some questions about Times Square and the timing there with FPL. FPL was a ways ahead of us. We didn't know about their project until a couple of weeks ago, but they are probably 6 weeks ahead of us on the planning for our project, which their project is subsurface, meaning they open up the ground, they put their electrical service in and close it back up. And then 6 weeks later, we'll come in, open up Times Square, put in our water and sewer, and then close it back. If we can coordinate those a little bit better, such as FPL providing overhead power temporarily to those that would like power there, that's a really good solution. We also have a DOT grant of about $1 million for the new pavers in Times Square, but that's not going to happen until July. So we've got three big things there: FPL, our utilities, and then the DOT grant that we'd like to try to correlate. Otherwise, we'll be disrupting Times Square 3 times between now and July. So just information at this point. We are meeting with FPL to see if we can't coordinate those times better for opening up Times Square. And then if they could provide overhead power, that would be, I think that'd be easy and a good solution, but I'm not the electrician.
I have kind of a question there,
Sure.
Keith. Is that, okay, the idea of going forward with pavers in Times Square, we really still don't know what Times Square is going to look like.
Correct. Not, you're talking about the private property adjacent to Times Square.
Are we going to, I mean, because I can think of like 4 different possible scenarios in Times Square, and it seems like some of those pavers may not be the best way to go, and others they would.
That's a great point on a fourth variable there to try to coordinate into the rehabbing of Times Square. Okay, also, with regards to Chad's berm and the FEMA emergency berm and the easements there, got language last night from John that makes it much more friendly towards not allowing public access, but also it does allow for the construction easement and monitoring over the next 15 years.
How are we communicating that out, other than this form right here?
Chad, you want to come up and address that?
You thought you were pretty smart sitting in the back of the room there, huh?
Hey, Chad Schutz, environmental staff. So on the website, emails for people, we have emails, and then mailing them out directly.
You're also doing door-to-door, I guess, with the assistance
the
of...
doors that are there, yes. Yep.
Have you contacted the condo associations of Fort Myers Beach to put that out?
Not yet. We, like you said, we just got it last night, so...
I understand, but...
absolutely, that's one of the emails that we got. I
Chad-
think it worked good last time.
Chad, those who have already signed, will they be required to re-sign, or will their signature carry over with the new language?
I wouldn't say required, but they definitely have the opportunity to sign on to the new one if they'd like.
I think go ahead. Sir.
Yeah, just on that question, Mr. Mayor, John, do they need to re-sign if they want to reap that benefit?
It would be their decision that, yes, they can.
Well, I know
They're not required.
I understand they're not required, but my point is if they don't ask for a new easement form and re-sign, do they not reap the benefit of this new language?
No, I think that based upon the prior conversations with staff is, the language regarding access is, I think, a little misinterpreted and misread. We've gone to great lengths to remedy that, but if it were me, I'd sign a new one and resolve any potential issues in doing so.
Thank you.
Chad, let me ask a question. Is there a time by which these easements need to be gained for this project?
Before Mr. Grubb starts placing sand on their property. But we'll set deadlines, just, nothing like a good deadline to get something done. Those could be considered a little bit soft, but we can't place sand on there until they sign that easement.
But with council's action today, Mr. Grubb's contract is approved to move forward once I sign.
Yep, so we got to have a pre-con meeting and get things rolling.
So we could begin as early as next week, I guess, is his mobilization. Does he have a mobilization time there?
Yeah, I have to talk with him.
All right, thanks.
Get the timeline. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I know it's late, but this is such an important issue for the town. John, do you just want to give a thumbnail sketch / summary of how the easement language has changed to benefit and strengthen the rights of the property owner?
Yes, we've made it very clear that, and this is primarily to the issue of the beach berm that we're discussing, is that there is no public dedication, there is no granting of the right of use to the public. That's going to be determined and decided as has consistently been explained based upon the new location of what the ECL is, will ultimately be determined by the state, not by the town. We don't determine where that ECL is once the beach is renourished. So there's no public dedication. What we can as staff, if it's the will of this council, is we can go to those individuals who have executed the easement already, advise them or inform them that a new easement has been developed, and it's, ask them, do they want to execute a new one or just move on? And we'll do that.
In my discussions with the town manager, it seems like, Keith, you had suggested something about, even if you're not signing it, please return us to let us know.
Yes, because we'll have to make assumptions if we don't have a response at all. If we have short gaps, can we assume, well, they didn't reply, should we try to plug that gap with the berm or not? Which I realize this is property that we would not have that access granted, but I think it would warrant making those decisions. So if we definitely have a response one way or the other, that will help us make those decisions.
It could be something as simple as refuse to sign and then return it?
Correct.
Or even an email to me if they want to do a hard no. I've gotten a couple of hard no's by email, and I just note it in the database accordingly.
Great, thank you.
Anything else, sir?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. Town attorney items.
Item, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Prior meeting, the council had asked for an update on the pending lien foreclosures. We've finished that memo. It'll be distributed later today. If you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call. There was also a corresponding question very specifically as to if there was any connection between the code lien that currently exists on the Kiostera Shops property and the Sea Grape property. Our research indicates that there is not. They're owned by two separate corporate entities, and under the language of the state statute and our town code, the lien attaches to the property of the entity. So if it's held in different names, it does not necessarily transfer.
And then if you would, John, I asked you earlier if you would opine on the process as we start getting into, later months
Yes.
of houses, mangroves, things like that are being removed without permits, or what you could just quickly synopsis what the town's process is.
Well, certainly, code enforcement processes is in general is what's out there. That is how local governments throughout the state enforce their local regulations, unless otherwise authorized by the local government to initiate some type of court action. So as a general rule, the town has historically relied upon the code enforcement process to enforce and obtain compliance with its rules and regulations and ordinances. And we will continue to do so and move forward. As it relates very specifically to the issue of cleaning up your property, whether or not it's organic or inorganic debris, as the case may be. Some people that organic stuff that's smelly is. We do have we have adopted as a town property maintenance requirements, and so those types of violations would, in my opinion, based upon our research, would fall within some of those code provisions, and we would begin to cite those individuals for failing to maintain their property in accordance with the property maintenance code requirements of the town code.
Are there any state requirements as to a time frame after a disaster, as to how long you have to give a property owner to clean up their property before you can start enforcing?
You know,
And I only ask that because
No, there isn't. I think that as a matter of practice and courtesy, the town council has, given all the property owners every opportunity to take advantage of the state cleanup option, and that deadline is coming up soon. So I would think at that point in time, it would behoove the town to start, picking up the enforcement on that end, because there's the state's just not going to do it for us.
Well, I think I want to be clear on that. The right-of-way debris cleanup has been given a deadline. We have not been given, unless something happened in the last 24 hours, we have not, that I'm aware of, been given a deadline for the debris cleanup site. People who have applied for that to have their properties cleaned up. They're two distinct things.
Yes, right. I would defer to staff on the private property side. It is the right-of-way cleanup that the state has set the deadline.
And if it would be okay with my fellow council members, I'd like to direct the town attorney to start drafting something for staff to be able to put out when the time comes, whenever that is, whenever the council decides, a detailed layout process of what the town will do once your due process, if you will. People dealing with their insurance companies, whatever, have gone through and exhausted all the efforts they can. Should the time come that the state stops picking up debris, whatever that is, so that we have something prepared that we can put out in advance to our residents to let them know that this is coming, that the town will have to at some point take care of some things that we don't want to have to take care of. But if it's okay with the council, I'd like to direct the attorney to get that ready so that it's in the staff's hands for the day that we have to put it out, or not the day, but in preemption of when we have to start taking that action.
And I think, like you said, a lot of people, I was actually commenting to somebody, you can go down the street and you can tell who has insurance because they're the houses at a time that were not torn down. So I'm sure there's a lot of people in the town in particular. I mean, look at our town hall, right? Nothing has been done with it. So I think maybe we have to come up with an alternative. So if people can't get the debris removed, maybe they have to fence it off or something in the interim.
Well, yeah, I just think something that at least lays out the process of what the town is going to take in next steps, so that everyone is clear what those steps are. It's not a hearsay thing. It's this is the actions of which we will take going forward if you don't remedy the situation.
And then giving people warning, so it's not just dropped on them and say you're going to get an X dollar a day fine to try to remove your old house.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could just add to the town manager and to the town attorney, if we could have a step in there or a provision in there that creates some sort of an ombudsman role for the town enforcement division. There may be people, I'm sure there are, that have very unique situations where they have done everything. They've done their due diligence. They're getting jerked around by their insurance company. They've got challenges, but they've done their best. They've applied for the appropriate programs. They've done everything they can do. In other words, I hate to see people penalized who've done their due diligence. We clearly have derelict properties where people have done nothing for reasons we don't know at this point. But there are a lot of people out there in tough spots, and I just think the town needs to show some grace and flexibility with those folks who have made an effort. They have to, and I think there has to be a process where they have to demonstrate that they've made an effort. I don't know what that process is. It's somewhat complicated, I'm sure, but somebody who could look at this situation with some common sense and say, my goodness, these folks have really done everything possible. They're in a unique situation, versus somebody who's just been derelict.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, if I may, there's always an exceptions to the rule, and some of them that we've regularly heard are those, where, again, organic materials just rotting on some of these commercial sites, and there's been no cleanup, and so those may be what I would call a separate category. But I would say to the entirety of this council, as well as to the community in general, is that even before Hurricane Ian, I think that you heard me say repeatedly from inquiries of the council that code enforcement cases wouldn't get to the special magistrate generally unless a 4 to 6 month time period had already passed, where staff was trying to obtain voluntary compliance from the property owner And the only ones that tended to go a little bit quicker were, what I would call the low-hanging fruit violations that weren't too difficult. But, historically, the town staff has tried to work with the property owners and will continue to do so, particularly given the circumstances that the entire community is going through.
All right, thanks, John. Anything else?
Nothing.
All right, council member items. Councilor King, since you're always last, we're going to start with you.
Oh, boy. Okay. I guess I'm not familiar with what a lot's going on with the Laola's situation specifically, but are we still in the process of moving forward with citing them and finding them?
There was a 10-day process hold, and we made some very good progress with FEMA and with this DEM, State Emergency Management, last week. So I think we need to get back together with them, confirm those conversations, and I'll just leave it at that, if I could, that the meeting was very positive.
But I have a concern that today is the first day they could be fined.
We will withhold fines, yes.
Until the cows come home?
Until
I don't know what they say up in the panhandle, but
I'm pretty much when the cows come home. I expect we'll have a good resolution to that this week, so we'll withhold fines for this week and then reevaluate pending our resolution with DEM. Can I say that? He's not in jeopardy of being fined right now.
That was a concern. Thank you. Having been in Times Square last Thursday, cleaning of those porta potties that we have is still an issue. What is the schedule on that? Do we know? Or
I'm sorry, which location?
Times Square.
Times Square. The deadlines on the work. Is that what you were saying? I'm sorry.
No, how often are they cleaned?
I was still thinking, the porta potties there are supposed to be daily.
Okay. Can I make a suggestion, because it was brought to my attention, I don't know how true it is, that something more on, for lack of a better term, a permanent basis that could be plugged into the sewer system, check into the cost of those. They're handicap accessible, something along those lines. It might be cheaper than what we're doing right now.
We can look into that and say yes.
I appreciate that.
Well, and I want to be, Councilor King, and there's several porta potties there that would be considered Times Square. Are we talking about the ones?
I'm talking about ours.
The specific ones, or are we also talking about the ones that are on Lynn Hall Park? I know I've had the same people say the same thing, but there's, I think, 8 or 9 different porta potties there that the town isn't. So without knowing which ones people are referring to specifically, it's, as I think the manager said, ours are supposed to be being emptied every morning. Maybe we need to check on that. But some of the other ones, we are not in control of when they get cleaned. So
I understand.
When people use Times Square, there's several that the town is not in charge of emptying. So we don't know exactly when the county is doing theirs.
Some concerns on the south end were raised to me about people doing, well, and it's probably just, it's obviously not just the south end, illegal parking, especially on the weekends. What are we, are we enforcing that on the weekends with with beach and street enforcement, or?
Yes, we are. We're in full enforcement where we have erected signs of town parking. So yes, we are full enforcement. But if signs have not been mounted yet, then we probably are not enforcing in those areas.
But I mean, they're parking on areas where it's pretty much common knowledge that they're not.
Okay, well, we should be in full enforcement, and we've received complaints on that side too, that
even on Saturday and Sunday, holidays.
Correct. I'm sorry. Yes, even on Saturdays and Sundays.
We've got. Is there a separate number for that on weekends and holidays versus during the day, or?
Not that I know of. No.
Okay.
So just to follow on with what John here is saying, so if people are illegally parking on someone's private property, is that something the town can enforce? Or does a town property owner have to
Well, that was gonna be my question to John. Is that something that a property owner could just call a tow truck and say, get these off my property? Or is it something the town has to be proactive on going? I mean, I don't know how we can go on someone's property to issue tickets.
No, if someone is parking on private property, that's an issue between the private property owner and whoever's, for all intents and purposes, trespassing on their property. Before towing it away, there are certain state law requirements, so that that apply to private property owners posting their property as no parking zones and things of that. So there may be some issues with how they then get a tow operator out there to tow someone away, and if individual property owners are running into that issue, they can call a tow company and find out what the rules are, and I'm sure that the tow companies will be more than willing to share that information with those property owners in anticipation of providing that service to them for a fee.
Last I knew, there was only one that the town approved for towing.
We basically follow the towing system that Lee County has in place. If I remember correctly, we may have, I think in the interlocal agreement, we certainly follow their regulations. That was the direction of the town council, last time I recall, was to adhere to the Lee County process.
I guess for people that are specifically listening, and I've seen the pictures, and then I've gotten the contacts, that we're talking about people parking on sidewalks on Estero Boulevard, parking on Estero Boulevard, parking on side streets. That's where we should be calling beach and street enforcement, correct?
That's correct, and we have been enforcing along Estero Boulevard.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right. Vice Mayor Adderholt?
I have nothing additional, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councilor Woodson?
I have two questions. I should have asked this, Chad, when you were up here, but do we know how many easements have been signed out of the total amount of easement signatures we need to get? I mean, just to get an idea on timing and moving this forward. And
It'd be on the order of around 50, 60. I've had, I think we're going to have a lot more signed now that we have the new easement out. That's been the holdup in a lot of these properties, so definitely a lot of work to do.
So if you have 50 or 60 in, how many do you need?
384, I believe.
So just like 20%.
Sure.
Okay. And thank you, Town Manager, for the updates on the open positions. Can you also update on the RFP for the new legal counsel?
Yeah, that's due back May 7th. Or responses to that are due May 7th.
Okay. That's all I have.
Councilor Veach?
A couple of things. Well, actually, it's probably more up your alley, so I'm just going to kind of casually mention it, but maybe an update on the whole FEMA county appraiser 50% rule, kerfuffle.
Yes.
And I'll defer that to you because you've been more central to it than anybody.
Okay.
One thing that I've been noticing is that I know that we approved for RVs to be put on land, and there's some places where people are taking that in the way it was intended. But I've noticed a proliferation of tents being put up on land.
I just saw it the other day.
And some of the people who are living in the tents don't look like they're property owners, should we say? And just, maybe we have some clear direction to staff to what constitutes a trailer or an RV versus a tent for people on property.
Well, yeah, I saw a few of those this weekend myself. It looks very uncomfortable to me, laying on some concrete, but maybe that's a question to you, John. I mean, our temporary use that we passed.
It does not include tents.
Okay, so as it stands right now, that's something that can be enforced. Unless, but then again, if, if someone's putting a tent on their land, is there anything inherently illegal with that?
Well, they have to get a permit still, though, don't they?
Would they still need to, I mean, I'm just thinking when I was a kid, we used to camp in the backyard without a permit.
It's not the same, quite.
I guess a question there would be, do we have a camping ordinance? And I'm not familiar if we do or not.
We'll check. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Let me check real quick.
And do we need one in order to, I guess, disallow it? I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we gotta give staff some time to look into this and maybe report back. That kind of hold up progress here, but I think that, some of these lots, people can't get a camper on there while they're rebuilding, so I'd say give the staff some time to take a look at it and bring it back to us.
yeah, and if that's the case, I mean, maybe it's a case-by-case thing, but certainly a lot of the ones I see look more like, the camps outside of some third world country in ways than, someone who owns a property who's living there. So anyway, yeah, I appreciate that. So maybe with direction, staff can look into it and come back to it with us.
Section 18-25 of the Town Code. No person shall set up tents, shacks, or any other temporary shelter for the purpose of overnight camping except in designated camping areas.
Okay. Staff got back to us pretty quickly then.
Council, I'm sorry.
So
I was going to go backwards, so. let you
If-
finish
about tents again, or are you?
No, back to Councilor Woodson.
You can certainly interject. I have one more item.
Go ahead and finish up, Bill.
All right.
And then we'll go back. Let Bill finish up.
Okay. The only
It may
thing
spur something else.
The only thing I have again is about just a discussion on Times Square. I know that some of the merchants and property owners have been getting together. I'd like to escalate that just so we get some expertise from FEMA and others of what we can do in Times Square and get some direction for people going forward, especially when we're looking at spending $1 million on pavers. Be nice to make that something that's useful with whatever plan is adopted for Times Square. And I don't know, maybe the best way is we can come up with a proper ad hoc committee where we appoint people to it, or we can just, send a liaison to the property owners and businesses if there's already an organization set up.
All right, thank you. Town manager?
Okay, I received a correction on the due date for the town attorney RFP. It was March 15th, not March 7th.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Anything else, Bill?
That's it.
All right. Most of mine have been covered, but since Bill has asked me to opine on the 50-50 rule, since I see Steve is still here, if you would come up, please, and update everyone as to our conversations in regards to the 50% rule based on our meetings and our conversations with John, as far as the 50% rule and the contentious second appraisal.
Sure. Steve Poposky, Community Development Director. We received 2 letters from FEMA over the last several days. The first one said that we were not to use the Lee County Property Appraiser's valuation on their tax roll value letter. So we issued guidance in that regard. And just shortly thereafter, we received what they called a clarification letter. I would say it would be a retraction letter of that first letter. So the second letter said that, as it turns out, we changed our mind and we are now saying you can use the letter, which is what all the jurisdictions around us are doing. So we have followed suit as well, and we're once again doing the same thing we always have been doing, which is following the tax roll value letter. And of course, you always have the option, according to our floodplain ordinance, of getting a private appraisal. Also, we have agreed. We spoke with several individuals, Keith, myself, and we will not be requiring a second appraisal in case the first appraisal is more than 35% than the original. Our floodplain ordinance has the word may, and after some discussion, we decided that that was an optional indication, so that we were within our rights to use our judgment on that.
I believe the term is defendable position or defensive position?
Yes, sir. As we discussed, it is permissive, very specific, and I think that our discussion was, in direction to staff and my conversations with Steve, is that it's permissive and at the discretion of Mr. Popomsky of situation where a second appraisal may be needed. And I want to emphasize may. And that is within his discretion to make that decision if the numbers are so out of whack that a second appraisal may be needed or warranted.
All right. Did that,
Well, a couple questions here now. So we're talking about hundreds of people who are already in the process of trying to build right under the 50% rule. Now, if someone, is there a time when if FEMA changes their mind that the people are somewhat protected? You know what I mean? So if next year FEMA's doing some kind of audit and they decide no, that those tax roll values should not be used, is that going to retroactively affect everyone who's been using that? You know, is there, because, and the other thing is, I understand that probably if you got a private appraisal, it would probably be closer to the tax roll letter value than it would be the assessed value.
There's several questions. I'll kind of address them one at a time. The question about what is the time frame, if FEMA issues us a directive that says that we are to do something, then we are basically required to follow that. Now, FEMA works a little bit, doesn't work exactly like that. They provide guidance, according to them, and ultimately they leave it up to each jurisdiction to make the determination as far as how they want to follow that guidance. So, for example, if there's a couple hundred people that have remodel permits that were, they were evaluated using a certain protocol, and FEMA decides that is to be changed, we had originally said we were going to go back based on their guidance and said that we want you to be consistent with this. However, it's really a moot point at this point because the second letter negated the first letter. And I'm sorry, the second question was?
Well, the first one, let's stick on the first one just for a second, because so if people have got if they've rebuilt in the 50% rule, they have a permit, they've either done the work or in the process of doing the work, then I guess if FEMA were to change their mind somewhere down the road, they may have to go and what would be their course? Get a private appraisal after the fact, or?
That would be the recommended approach. I think at any point, our floodplain ordinance allows an appraisal to be used in lieu of the property appraiser value. So that's generally what we recommend is, go ahead, if you disagree with that value, get a private appraisal, and we will accept that as well.
They could wait to do that until, because if they're okay the way it's done now with the tax roll value, then that's something they could always do if things change in the future. There's not a huge benefit for them doing it now. You see what I'm kind of getting to. I mean, is it worth people going and paying $1,000 to get an appraisal now as an insurance against FEMA changing their mind? Or if FEMA does something else down the line, can they go through and then get an appraisal?
I guess I would recommend that someone save their money if they don't need to get the appraisal. Go ahead and wait. If your tax roll value letter says that your building value is $200,000, and your total cost to repair your structure to its pre-damaged condition is, let's say, $50,000, then you're not going to be over the 50% rule because you would be at $100,000, 50%. In that case, there's no need to get an appraisal because you can just use the tax roll value letter.
So, but if you're cutting it close, then maybe there's more value to that.
Exactly. I guess that's a personal decision, but I don't think that people need to spend the money unless they disagree with the value or they feel like that may change the determination.
And I think just a little bit to be more clear, a little more clear, Bill. We can't control water, obviously. Water, if FEMA decides to send out, is something that could potentially change. So we can't move forward based on ifs. I think, but what the important part, I think what Steve is saying is if you are currently in the process from which you've used the tax roll letter and you're within your 50%, you've been issued your permit, you can continue to move forward in that direction without having to go get the private appraisal. However, if you have a comfortability level that you're not sure as to what FEMA may or may not do in the future, you certainly have the right to go out and get that private appraisal to put on record with staff so that every basis you have is covered.
Right, right. So it provides a little more coverage for you, a little more insurance, if you will.
Sure, should you choose to want to go that direction.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Steve. I think you
Could
did
I-
it. Yeah,
Could
go
I
ahead.
just say a couple quick things? First of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Town Manager, Mr. Attorney, and Steve. Thanks for handling a rather difficult week, shall we say, with the plum and class, along with our county appraiser. Thanks for reconsidering the town's position of requiring a second appraisal. I think that's going to be a big help to a number of people, and I appreciate your consideration of that. A lot of people don't realize that you guys aren't doing that to be difficult, weren't doing it to be difficult. You were trying to be compliant with whatever FEMA, whatever the crystal ball and we have in front of us thinks FEMA wants to know and hear and be comfortable with. So you're placed in a tough position because you're required to be consistent with FEMA's regulations, which isn't always doesn't always appear to be user-friendly for the town, but you are, in the big picture, protecting our ability to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. So I'm so glad that Councilor Veach raised this question, because I hear a lot of people on Facebook talking about getting a appraisal just to be safe. And again, if it gives people comfort, that's great, and that's their decision. But you're saying, Steve, today that if the tax roll value letter gets you to where you need to be or want to be, you do not need to get an appraisal.
Correct. Yeah. Like, for example, if you were under the 50%, and hypothetically speaking, FEMA changes their mind again and comes back to us and says, yeah, turns out we do need to use the lower value, whatever. At that point, we would readdress all of the, all the determinations that have been made. And if you were originally under the 50%, but now it looks like you're over, then we would suggest at that point again that you would get an appraisal as an option. Because, the other option is obviously to comply with the regulations, which could be quite a bit more expensive.
Thank you very much.
Now, is there any difficulty for people getting an appraisal for a house that is either no longer, because you need an appraisal from the pre-storm condition. How hard is that for an appraiser to do when now a couple of years have gone by?
Well, I'm not an appraiser, but I'll lead with that. There's some resistance, and I think in the appraisal world to do that, just because they have to extrapolate. They can't look at the building the way it was. They have to use, it's almost like a forensic appraisal. But that being said, there's plenty of appraisals coming in, so there are people out there performing that work.
All right, thanks for clarifying that.
Thanks, Steve. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I figured it'd be easier to you say it than me. People are tired of hearing me say it. All right, I do not have anything else to add to that. Everyone else has covered my other items. With that, I'll look
Move
for a
to
motion.
adjourn.
There's a motion. I'll second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 12:13.